You were clearly just pushing a busted tricycle at the factory gates selling cheap box lunches, yet you managed to make all 30,000 workers willingly starve while queuing up in a massive 100-meter line, refusing to take even a single bite from the company cafeteria. All because your state banquet level culinary mastery could turn even the cheapest braised pork with radish into a feast that left the factory director's secretary drooling. Right at that moment, Chen Xiangdong violently snapped his eyes open, staring at the yellowed newspaper plastered over the walls, as his brain buzzed and rang frantically. He wasn't dead, a grand legendary 21st century state banquet head chef, supposedly blown to bits when a gas canister exploded, had actually transmigrated back to the early 1990s, returning to the dark era when he was still a worthless, degenerate gambler. Every single table and chair in the room belonged to the dilapidated shack he lived in during his youth. Before he could even process what was happening, a frail, emaciated woman spread her arms wide, shielding the bed, with her voice trembling uncontrollably. Song Xiuyun begged, "Brother Long, please just give us a few more days. We will absolutely pay back the money." This was his wife Song Xiuyun, the scarred-faced thug leading the pack. Known as Brother Long, slammed his hand viciously onto the rickety wooden table, shoving Song Xiuyun aside and roaring, "Get the hell out of my way. Chen Xiangdong, stop playing dead for lousy, you owe 300 bucks. But with interest today, you're coughing up 400. If you don't have the cash hand over this damn house." Song Xiuyun retreated to the corner of the wall in sheer terror, tears welling up and spinning in her eyes, as she bit her lip raw, not daring to make a single sound. The moment Chen Xiangdong witnessed this oppressive scene, a violent rage instantly exploded within his chest. In his past life, he had been an absolute piece of trash, drinking and gambling his life away, ultimately driving Song Xiuyun to leap into the river to escape the loan sharks. Even after he rose to become a legendary state banquet head chef, that haunting guilt remained the ultimate lifelong scar in his heart. Now that the heavens had granted him a second chance at life, he would absolutely never let his wife suffer another ounce of grievance. He flipped out of bed, snatching a rusted kitchen knife right off the table in one fluid motion. Chen Xiangdong let out a thunderous roar, lay a single finger on her, and see what happens. With a sudden aggressive flick of his wrist, the battered kitchen knife tore through the air, whistling fiercely as it flew. With a violent splintering crash, the knife embedded itself deeply into the doorframe, the blade buried in the wood while the handle vibrated frantically. The razor-sharp edge had grazed past Brother Long's ear, completely slicing off a small lock of his hair. Brother Long shuddered violently from head to toe, utterly paralyzed with fear. His legs instantly turned to jelly, stumbling backward 2 steps and nearly crashing to the floor as he stammered out, You've gone completely insane. Murder requires you to pay with your own damn life." Chen Xiangdong locked his dead icy glare onto Brother Long, forcing him back step by step while muttering, "A worthless life like mine. Exchange for Brother Long's life is a steal. As for the 300 bucks, I'll pay it back in 3 days. Now take your worthless dogs and get the hell out. Vaillos." Brother Long stared at his utterly suicidal, desperate posture, gulping down a mouthful of nervous spit. This punk used to be a spineless coward. So how the hell did he look like a completely different person today? Brother Long simply didn't dare to gamble with his life, barking out a savage threat. "Fine. Consider yourself tough, but if I don't see that cash in 3 days, Laozi will personally rip off one of your legs." With that final roar, he bolted out with his lackeys. An eerie silence instantly blanketed the room, leaving Song Xiuyun collapsed on the floor, weeping and sobbing uncontrollably. Chen Xiangdong moved closer to comfort and help her up, but she recoiled instantly as if dodging a deadly plague, her eyes completely filled with absolute despair. Song Xiuyun screamed, asking him if things weren't chaotic enough already, wondering where on earth they would find 400 bucks in 3 short days. Was he truly not going to stop until he finally drove her to her grave? Staring at his wife's haggard, utterly broken face, Chen Xiangdong felt a sharp, agonizing twist in his heart. Chen Xiangdong choked out, "Xiuyun, I know I was an absolute bastard before, but I'm changing. Don't worry about the money anymore. I will personally find a way." Without wasting any more words on explanations, he turned around and strode into the drafty, dilapidated kitchen. The stove was caked under a thick layer of dust, and the rice urn was completely scraped cleaner than a freshly washed face. The only things left in the corner were 3 sprouting potatoes and half a withered, decaying cabbage. Chen Xiangdong yanked the battered kitchen knife from the doorframe and weighed it. The edge clearly rolled and dull. Since it didn't feel right, he scraped it heavily against the whetstone a few times, and his aura completely transformed in an instant. Decades of experience as a legendary 21st century state banquet head chef meant he possessed absolute powerhouse culinary mastery. Shredding potato strips was the ultimate brutal test of a chef's fundamentals. By state banquet standards, a single potato strand had to thread through the eye of a needle and remain perfectly unbroken even after hitting a blazing wok, though the knife itself was garbage. His sheer wrist strength and immaculate eyesight were still very much alive. He washed and peeled the vegetables, pressing his left hand firmly onto a potato, while his right hand gripped the knife firmly. and with a sudden forceful drop of his wrist, thud 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 thud, the kitchen knife transformed into a blurry phantom across the cutting board, creating a rapid-fire rhythm as dense as a machine gun blast. The sliced potatoes were cut so paper-thin they were literally translucent, and in the next instant, he fanned them out smoothly with a single sweep, sending the razor-sharp edge raining down once more. In less than 30 seconds flat, all 3 potatoes were effortlessly converted into matchstick shreds as fine as individual strands of hair, each piece so flawlessly uniform that they could easily thread right through the eye of a needle. Song Soo-yoon, hearing the chaotic commotion, wiped her tears away and walked over, only to freeze in absolute slack-jawed shock the moment she reached the doorway. Was this monstrously skilled chef seriously her husband Chen Xiangdong? This was a guy who wouldn't even bother to pick up a tipped-over soy sauce bottle before. So how on earth could he chop vegetables at such blinding godly speeds with such perfection? Even the head chefs at elite state-run restaurants didn't possess this level of divine mastery. Chen Xiangdong plunged the shredded potatoes into cold water to wash away the excess starch, and immediately fired up the stove, pouring in the cooking oil. The household possessed nothing but a meager amount of cloudy low-grade rapeseed oil, but he didn't complain for a single second. As the oil heated up to a blistering 70% intensity, he grabbed a handful of dried chili peppers and Sichuan peppercorns, tossing them straight into the heat. A ferocious sizzle erupted instantly, unleashing an aggressive wave of spicy, numbing aroma that immediately forced anyone nearby to aggressively swallow their saliva. Right on cue, the mountain of shredded potatoes was dumped into the blazing wok. Chen Xiangdong tightly gripped the handle with his left hand, thrusting forward and pulling back in a flawless rhythm, before executing a violent, powerful toss. The shredded potatoes launched into the air, soaring completely out of the pan, performing a perfect somersault in mid-air before landing flawlessly back into the center of the wok. This masterful wok-tossing technique was utterly slick and professional, leaving Song Soo-yoon completely dazed and stupefied as she watched. Immaculate heat control is the absolute soul of stir-frying, and simply by listening to the crackling explosions of the hot oil, Chen Xiangdong didn't even need to look with his eyes. To know the exact temperature, 1 second too long and they would turn into mush, 1 second too short and they would remain unpleasantly raw, relying purely on his elite decades-old muscle memory. At the exact millisecond, the raw edge of the potatoes vanished. He splashed a spoonful of aged vinegar directly along the scorching rim of the wok. Meeting the blistering hot iron pan, the liquid vaporized into steam in an instant, unleashing an incredibly rich, mouth-watering aroma that completely enveloped every single shred of potato. Finally, he tossed in a handful of freshly chopped scallions and plated the dish. The plate of hot and sour shredded potatoes shone with a brilliant golden translucency, each individual strand perfectly separated from the next, without a single drop of excess watery sauce left behind. The mesmerizing heavenly aroma aggressively assaulted their senses. Chen Xiangdong brought the steaming plate over to the table and handed a pair of chopsticks to Song Soo-yoon, saying, "There's literally nothing else left in the house right now, so eat this first to stave off your hunger." Song Soo-yoon stared intently at the glowing dish, hesitating for a long moment, completely afraid to take the chopsticks. Could a degenerate, worthless gambler seriously create something like this? The intoxicating fragrance was just too damn irresistible. Having starved for an entire day, she swallowed her pooling saliva, finally accepting the chopsticks to lift a single tiny strand into her mouth. The absolute second she took a bite and chewed, Song Soo-yoon's eyes instantly shot wide open in pure shock. Crispy. It was unbelievably crispy. An explosion of tangy, fiery flavors erupted across her tongue, bringing an insanely refreshing crunch that blew her mind. There wasn't a single hint of that raw, bitter potato taste, nor was there any of that overcooked, mushy texture. This otherworldly flavor was literally 100 times better than the finest meat feast during New Year's. She instantly picked up a massive, overflowing clump with her chopsticks, stuffing it into her mouth, but as she chewed frantically, heavy silent tears began pattering down her cheeks. "What's wrong? Is it too spicy for you?" Chen Xiangdong asked in a panic, hurriedly pouring a cup of water and handing it over. Song Soo-yoon aggressively shook her head, slammed the chopsticks down, buried her face in her hands, and burst into a violent sob. In the 3 agonizing years since marrying Chen Xiangdong, she had lived every single day in absolute terror and anxiety, never having enjoyed even one proper filling meal. Yet today, this very same man had actually, for the absolute first time, personally cooked such a phenomenally delicious meal just for her, staring at his completely shattered, tear-stained wife. Chen Xiangdong took giant strides forward, pulling her firmly into a tight embrace. "Soo-yoon, please don't cry anymore. I was a complete piece of trash in the past and put you through hell. But starting from this exact second, if I Chen Xiangdong ever cause you to shed another single tear of sorrow, may I step outside and get instantly obliterated by a speeding truck." Song Soo-yoon buried herself deeper into his chest, weeping even harder, her hands tightly gripping his ragged clothes with a death vice. Once Song Soo-yoon finally managed to calm her raging emotions, Chen Xiangdong took the remaining half head of cabbage and chopped it down, He expertly sliced the thick cabbage stems into perfect diamond-shaped blocks, tore the leaves apart with his bare hands, and flash-fried a stunning plate of hot and sour cabbage. He unearthed a battered ancient insulated food container to carefully pack the freshly cooked food. Out in the yard sat a heavily broken-down pedal-powered tricycle, its metal chain completely covered in thick rust. He quickly squeezed a few drops of rapeseed oil onto the wheel axles, and after stomping on the pedals a couple of times, it was surprisingly ready to roll. With her eyes still swollen and red, Song Seo-yun softly asked, "Xiangdong, where on earth are you going?" Chen Xiangdong aggressively slapped the torn bicycle seat, a ferocious, unwavering determination flashing violently across his eyes, as he declared, "I'm going to make some serious cash. That $400 in 3 days. Lao Zi is going to personally hurl every single penny of it right into Brother Long's worthless face." As a grand legendary state banquet head chef, selling box lunches on the streets of the early 1990s was the ultimate definition of total absolute domination. Relying purely on his god-tier heat control and immaculate seasoning, he could easily and utterly conquer the taste buds of those workers who were completely sick and tired of cafeteria food. Located not too far from his shack was the absolute largest machinery factory in the entire city, where over 30,000 hard labor workers were completely draining their bodies daily, desperately longing for nothing more than a piping hot meal the exact second they clocked out. This very factory was going to be the gold mine for his first bucket of gold. Chen Xiangdong gently wiped away the remaining tears from his wife's face, straddled the battered, creaking tricycle, stomped down on the pedals with explosive force, and charged directly toward the main gates of the machinery factory. Right now it was barely past 11:30 a.m., meaning there was still a brief window of time before the midday lunch rush. Before heading out, he had completely cleaned out his entire household savings, and furthermore, forced himself to swallow his pride, to head over to Auntie Liu's house next door to borrow half, a bottle of soybean oil, along with 2 firm blocks of aged tofu, barely scrambling together enough ingredients to fill 2 massive insulated food containers. One container held a serving of twice-cooked cabbage, while the other was filled with mouth-watering mapo tofu, dangling directly from the handlebars. Was a basket stuffed with mixed-grain mantu buns blended with cheap cornmeal. Right outside the factory gates, a handful of elderly vendors selling roasted sweet potatoes and melon seeds had already gathered. And as these old men and women watched Chen Xiangdong push his busted tricycle into view, they all looked at him as if he were an absolute brainless idiot. An old grandpa selling loose tobacco tried to kindly warn him, shouting out, "Listen here, young man, you're seriously coming all the way here to sell food? The factory already has its own massive cafeteria, so who on earth would waste their money eating street food like?" Chen Xiangdong simply flashed a confident, knowing grin, without offering a single word of rebuttal, and immediately parked his tricycle right in the most glaringly conspicuous prime spot directly facing the main gates. He yanked off a ragged cloth to aggressively wipe down his hands. During the early 1990s, workers in these massive state-run factories actually had plenty of spare pocket change to burn. But the abysmal standard of the factory cafeteria food was something he had personally witnessed in his past life. It was utterly incredibly garbage. Before long, the deafening lunch bell echoed across the area. The massive iron gates clanged and rattled violently as they were thrown open, and a massive tidal wave of workers dressed in identical blue uniforms surged out of the facility in massive, overwhelming waves. The entire crowd was instantly thick with heavy grumbling and bitter complaints. The workers cursed furiously, shouting, "Son of a bitch! The first cafeteria is seriously serving nothing but watery, overcooked, boiled cabbage again today. You can't even spot a single solitary drop of oil in the entire damn pot. That absolute piece of trash Wang Dabiao. Did that bastard pocket all the meat budget and stuff it straight into his own wallet?" The workers were completely forced day in and day out to choke down this literal pig slop masquerading as food. After operating heavy lathe machinery for an entire grueling morning, their stomachs were completely glued to their backs from sheer starvation, meaning eating that garbage wouldn't give them a single ounce of actual energy. Hearing this explosive chorus of frustrated cursing Chen Xiangdongs, eyes flashed with a brilliant predatory light. His golden opportunity had officially arrived. Taking a deep, calculated breath, he gripped the handles of both massive insulated food containers with both hands, and violently whipped the lids right off. With a dramatic explosive whoosh, a massive cloud of piping hot white steam erupted into the air. This was absolutely no ordinary cloud of steam. When cooking Chen Xiangdong had blasted the iron wok to a blistering red-hot maximum heat, before adding the cold oil. Tossing the ingredients in the exact millisecond the oil temperature began releasing blue smoke, causing the moisture to instantly vaporize into pure flavor. This exact technique took the deep, rich lipid aroma of the soybean oil, the heavily savory fermented fragrance of the broad bean paste, and the violently numbing essence of the Sichuan peppercorns, locking them absolutely into the water vapor. This was precisely what master chefs reverently referred to as the breath of the wok. The absolute moment those lids were breached, this insanely aggressive dominant aroma rode the wind, drilling directly and violently into the worker's nostrils. The grumbling, swearing workers instantly froze in their tracks in perfect synchronized unison. The workers demanded, "What on earth is that? Smell? How can it possibly be this insanely fragrant? Yay!" Others shouted, "Who the hell is cooking over there? This peppercorn aroma is absolute god tier. It's literally making my mouth water like crazy." A few heavily built, muscular young men followed the irresistible scent trail directly to its source, completely surrounding Chen Xiangdong's battered tricycle. The ringleader was a massive burly fellow, whose work uniform was completely caked in dark engine oil, craning his neck forward aggressively to peer straight into the containers. The burly worker barked out, "Hey brother, what kind of mind-blowing food are you selling here?" Chen Xiangdong instantly hoisted a massive iron ladle and gave the rich contents of the container a slow, powerful stir. A sea of crimson chili oil rippled and rolled, revealing pristine, silken white blocks of tofu bathing and jiggling in the fiery red sauce. The pristine white cubes were completely smothered in a glossy, rich coating of savory sauce, while the other container showcased tender cabbage stems stir-fried to a stunning, slightly charred crispiness, even though there wasn't a single shred of meat present. The visual spectacle alone was enough to make everyone aggressively swallow their pooling saliva. Chen Jiangdong offered a warm, confident grin as he announced the menu: authentic mapo tofu, sizzling twice-cooked cabbage, and a side of piping hot mixed-grain mantu buns. It's just 20 cents a portion, and you can eat your absolute fill of buns. The burly worker froze for a split second, his brow furrowing deeply in immediate skepticism. As he barked, "The factory cafeteria charges a mere 5 cents for a vegetable dish. Charging 20 cents out here is a total ripoff, isn't it? You don't even have a single slice of meat in there." The surrounding blue-collar crowd, hearing the 20-cent price tag, began aggressively shaking their heads. One worker grumbled, "That's way too damn expensive. 20 cents can literally buy me a whole pack of decent cigarettes." Another worker instantly chimed in saying, "Exactly, there's no meat whatsoever yet you're selling it. At such a ridiculous price, you must be completely insane for cash." Seeing that the gathered crowd was about to disperse, Chen Xiangdong didn't show even a single flicker of panic. Instead, he calmly picked up a pristine, clean enamel bowl, scooped up a generous half ladle of the vibrant mapo tofu, added a massive expert chopstick clump of the crisp, twice-cooked cabbage, and thrust it directly toward the burly worker's face. Chen Xiangdong said smoothly, "Listen, big brother, whether this food is worth it or not is for your tongue to decide. Take a bite first. It's completely free. If you think it's not worth those 20 cents after tasting it, you can turn around and walk away instantly, and I absolutely won't stand in your way." The massive worker gulped hard, struggling to swallow his saliva, simply because the sheer aroma of the food was entirely too dominant and aggressive, drilling directly into his nostrils, and causing his stomach to rumble and growl fiercely. The worker barked out, "Fine, I'll give it a shot. But if this garbage tastes bad, I'm personally smashing your entire tricycle stand." The man snatched the bowl, completely ignoring the blistering steam, and eagerly shoveled a massive overflowing mouthful of tofu straight into his maw. The absolute microsecond the tofu hit his palate, the worker's eyes shot wide open into perfectly round circles. Hot. It was intensely, brutally hot. But immediately following that blistering wave, a ferocious explosion of numbing, spicy, savory perfection detonated violently across his taste buds. The tofu was so impossibly silky, it felt like it literally melted on impact, while the electrical numbing sensation of the peppercorns surged up his tongue, blasting straight to his brain. The deep, rich umami of the fermented bean paste followed closely behind, completely hijacking his senses. Barely chewing a couple of times, the man swallowed the massive bite whole, a layer of fine, glistening sweat instantly bursting across his forehead. He let out an explosive, involuntary roar, "Holy crap, this is insane!" And in the very next instant, he frantically shoved that piece of twice-cooked cabbage straight into his mouth. With an incredibly crisp, ringing crunch, the hearty cabbage stem turned out to be spectacularly crunchy. Not only was it insanely crisp, it also carried a deep, intensely rich undertone of lard-rendered aroma and the smoky, fiery punch of dried chilies. Even though it was undeniably just a basic, humble cabbage, it somehow managed to deliver the exact same profound satisfaction of eating rich, slow braised pork. The surrounding crowd asked anxiously, "Hey, big brother, how is it? Is it actually good?" But the massive worker completely lacked the time or breath to pay them any attention, frantically licking the very bottom of the bowl clean in just 2 or 3 massive bites. He violently slammed the empty bowl back onto the tricycle bed with a loud thud, bellowing out with absolute breathless urgency, "Give me 2 portions. No scratch that make it 3 portions. Lousy is going to feast like a king this afternoon." The man whipped out 60 cents from his pocket, slammed the coins onto the bicycle seat, and barked, "And hand over 4 of those mantu buns right now." Witnessing this man devour the food like a ravenous, newly reincarnated, hungry ghost, the surrounding crowd of workers instantly began drooling from pure, unadulterated envy. One worker blurted out, "Is it seriously that mind-blowingly delicious? Give me a portion too." Another worker screamed, "I want a portion as well." Serve me first. Okay. More voices joined the chorus shouting, "Hey, don't push! Get in line, queue up." The very same workers who had just complained about the steep price went completely feral in an instant. 20 cents was admittedly not cheap by any means, but for this exhausted crew grinding through brutal, heavy labor, day in and day out, trapped with utterly bland, tasteless palates. As long as the food tasted this god tier, 20 cents didn't mean a damn thing to them. Chen Xiangdong's hands and feet moved with practiced lightning-fast agility as he began serving the food. His movements were incredibly fluid and rapid. His left hand grabbed the container while his right wielded the utensils, dishing out a scoop of silky tofu, a massive heap of cabbage with his chopsticks, and slapping 2 massive fluffy mantou buns smoothly onto the lunchbox in one seamless motion. The entire sequence was spectacularly flawless. The elite fundamental skills he had meticulously honed over decades of handling the ladle in his past life were currently being flexed to their absolute maximum. Chen Xiangdong called out, "Here's yours, take it steady," followed by, "Yours is ready, be careful, it's blistering hot, and continuously shouting, "Don't panic everyone, there's plenty for everybody." The massive horde surrounding the tricycle grew larger and denser by the second, forming 3 thick inner rings and another 3 outer layers. The waves of workers who had clocked out a bit later, spotting the massive chaotic crowd gathered at the front, curiously drifted over to see what was happening, only to be completely paralyzed in their tracks the absolute microsecond they caught a whiff of that aroma. Desperate workers began shouting, "Hey, hey, save some for me. I've already pulled my damn cash out." Another worker bellowed, "You guys in the front hurry the hell up and eat. Empty those bowls so the rest of us can use them." The pristine enamel bowls Chen Xiangdong brought along were nowhere near enough to handle the sheer volume. Countless workers literally bolted back to their respective workshops, grabbing their personal aluminum lunchboxes to fetch the food. Right off to the side, the elderly vendors selling roasted sweet potatoes and melon seeds were staring in total slack-jawed shock. They had been running their stands here for several grueling years, making a meager 80 cents or a single buck on a good day. Yet this young punk's stand had barely been operational for less than 20 minutes, and he could barely keep track of the chaotic influx of cash flying his way in under 30 minutes flat. The very bottoms of both massive insulated food containers were scraped entirely clean, leaving absolutely not a single drop of crimson chili oil, which was completely wiped out by a heavyset worker using his remaining mantou bun to sweep the barrel. The dozen or so unfortunate souls still stuck at the back of the queue stamped their feet in pure frustration, crying out, "It's gone, just like that, it's completely sold out." Someone grumbled bitterly, "Come on, brother. This is an absolute joke. Your supply is pathetic." I queued up for a literal eternity and didn't even get a single bite. Chen Xiangdong flipped the completely empty containers upside down to show them, wiping the heavy sweat pouring from his forehead, as he offered a warm, confident grin, saying, "My apologies, big brothers. Today marks my absolute first day out here with the stand, so my preparations were clearly lacking. I'll be right back here tomorrow at noon, and I guarantee I'll double the portions." Someone shouted back, "You better keep your damn word. If I don't get a taste tomorrow, I'm personally smashing the windows of your house." Even though the remaining workers left empty-handed, they could only smack their lips in bitter disappointment before dispersing. Chen Xiangdong securely capped the empty containers, leaning heavily against the tricycle as he panted heavily for air. Despite the physical exhaustion, his heart felt absolutely ecstatic. He fished out every single note and coin stuffed in his pockets, laying them all onto the tricycle seat to count 10-cent bills, 20-cent bills, 50-cent bills, and even a few crisp 1 yuan notes. It formed a thick, substantial wad of cash, after meticulously recounting the funds one final time. The grand total came to exactly 17 yuan and 80 cents, deducting the baseline cost of the borrowed soybean oil, the firm tofu, and the cheap cornmeal. His day one net profit sat at a glorious 15 yuan flat. In an era where a standard factory worker's monthly salary amounted to barely 40 or 50 yuan max, he had effectively cleared 10 days' worth of an ordinary person's wages in just half an hour. Chen Xiangdong tightly clenched the stack of bills in his fist, letting out a long, deeply satisfied breath. The seemingly impossible 400 yuan debt was officially on the ropes. Chen Xiangdong ground it out, running his hustle relentlessly for 3 straight days. After pulling in a net profit of 15 yuan on day 1, he doubled it to 30 yuan on day 2, by the time the 3rd day arrived. The legendary reputation of his god-tier box lunches completely took the steel rolling mill by storm, even driving workers from the neighboring textile factory to sprint over just to join the queue. On the night of the 3rd day after packing up his stand and heading home, Chen Xiangdong flipped his cash-filled iron lunchbox upside down right onto the heated brick bed. A literal mountain of small denomination bills spilled out, and he pulled Song Xiuyun over to count the massive hoard together. 10 cents, 20 cents, 50 cents, 1 yuan. The duo counted until their fingers were completely numb and aching. factoring in the profits stockpiled over the previous 2 days, along with the cash advances prepaid by workers desperate to secure their meal tickets. The grand total came to a staggering 420 yuan flat. Chen Xiangdong snatched up 400 yuan, stuffed it deep into his pocket, and immediately stormed out of the house, heading straight toward the back of the factory pool hall. The ruthless loan shark, Brother Bazi, was currently shirtless playing cards with his crew, while dangling a cigarette casually from his lips. Chen Xiangdong marched right up to him, and with a violent resounding slam, trod a thick wad of cash secured with a rubber band directly onto the gambling table. 400 yuan principal and interest included. Start counting. Brother Bazi's hand trembled violently on instinct, dropping cigarette ash right onto his bare stomach, making him flinch from the sudden burn. He stared open-mouthed at the fat stack of cash on the table, then locked his eyes onto Chen Xiangdong for a long, stunned silence, completely unable to process it. It had barely been 3 days. Did this dirt-poor punk pull off a literal bank heist? Brother Bazi grabbed the money, wetting his thumb with spit as he meticulously counted through it. Not a single penny was missing. Brother Bazi growled, "Fine. I'll admit you've got some serious guts." With a heavy thud, he slammed the original IOU contract onto the table. Chen Xiangdong snatched up the debt note without giving it a single glance, viciously ripping it to shreds, tossing it onto the dirty floor, and turning on his heel to leave. With the heavy chains of debt completely broken, he felt lighter than air. The absolute moment he stepped out of the pool hall, Chen Xiangdong grabbed the hand of Song Xiuyun, who had been anxiously keeping watch outside, and headed straight for the city department store. Song Xiuyun tugged violently at his sleeve and questioned, "Xiangdong, what on earth are we doing here? The debt is paid, but we need to hoard the remaining cash to buy rice and cooking oil." Staring at the brilliantly illuminated, dazzling light bulbs inside the massive department store, she felt a sudden wave of intimidation and stage fright. Chen Xiangdong smiled gently. "The cash for rice and oil is already safely set aside. Today I'm buying you brand new clothes." Chen Xiangdong pulled her firmly in one fluid motion straight toward the women's apparel counter, where his eyes instantly locked onto a gorgeous, vibrant rose-red dacron blouse. Chen Xiangdong declared confidently, "Comrade, please take this piece down so my wife can try it on." The sales clerk merely glanced at them from the corner of her eyes, looking down heavily at the patches scattering across their old, tattered clothes, before muttering coldly, "This item is exactly 8 yuan and 50 cents. Absolutely no haggling." Chen Xiangdong didn't waste a single word of explanation, instantly slamming down a crisp, high-value 10 yuan bill right onto the counter. Song Xiuyun's heart completely ached over the steep cost, and no matter what, she stubbornly refused to try it on, getting so intensely anxious that tears almost burst from her eyes. Chen Xiangdong forcefully stuffed the fabric directly into her arms, and gently pushed her straight into the changing room. The absolute second Song Xiuyun finished changing and stepped outside. Chen Xiangdong's eyes shot wide open in pure fascination. The vibrant rose-red blouse complemented her fair skin beautifully, instantly restoring a healthy, radiant glow to her previously pale, gaunt face. This was exactly how a gorgeous young woman in her 20s was truly supposed to look. Chen Xiangdong then casually picked out a clean white dress shirt for himself, and the two of them strode out of the building, proudly rocking their brand new outfits. Song Xiuyun tightly clenched Chen Xiangdong's hand, and for the absolute first time in her life, she held her back perfectly straight and high, at the crack of dawn on the very 4th day. The absolute second the sun broke, Chen Xiangdong donned his pristine white shirt, pedaling his tricycle straight toward the bustling agricultural wholesale market. Since he planned to expand his inventory by an extra 50 box lunches today, he desperately needed to purchase over 100 pounds of fresh green vegetables and potatoes. The moment his vehicle came to a halt right in front of Old Lee's familiar produce stall, Old Lee immediately flashed a deeply troubled face, frantically waving his hands as he sighed. "Xiangdong, I have absolutely zero vegetables to sell you today. Go check out the other vendors." As Old Lee spoke, he hurriedly tried to hide the bamboo baskets overflowing with fresh cabbage. Right behind his back, Chen Xiangdong froze in total confusion, demanding, "Uncle Lee, what on earth is going on here? I brought more than enough cash with me today, and I'm paying up front in physical bills." Old Lee lowered his voice to a hushed whisper, muttering, "This has absolutely nothing to do with cash," while his nervous gaze constantly darted over toward the side. A mocking, arrogant voice suddenly echoed from the shadow, sneering, "Oh, look, the little punk put on clean clothes. Are you trying to flex and pose as a wealthy big shot or something?" Chen Xiangdong pivoted his head around to look, spotting a savage-looking man caked in rolls of fat, strutting over with his massive belly protruding aggressively. This thug wore a heavily stained, grease-slicked blue work uniform, dangling a toothpick from his mouth while staring down at everyone through his nostrils. This man was none other than Wang Dabiao, the corrupt head of purchasing for the steel rolling mill's first cafeteria. Chen Xiangdong's explosive 3-day hustle selling street box lunches had completely decimated the first cafeteria's daily business. The workers aggressively preferred to queue up in massive lines outside in the elements, rather than choke down the cafeteria's atrocious water-boiled cabbage. with the cafeteria's massive leftovers being dumped directly into the waste bins. The furious factory director had ruthlessly laid into Wang Dabiao, giving him a legendary scolding. But the absolute deadliest blow was that the cafeteria's purchasing volume plummeted drastically, meaning the dirty kickbacks Wang Dabiao used to pocket had completely evaporated. Wang Dabiao harbored such a lethal burning hatred for Chen Xiangdong that his teeth literally ached. He strutted right up into Chen Xiangdong's personal space, brutally slamming his heavy boot onto the front wheel of the tricycle, spitting out his toothpick as he let out a venomous sneer. Wang Dabiao barked, "Listen up, Chen Xiangdong. You've been acting pretty damn high and mighty these past couple of days, but you've got some serious nerve trying to hijack the Laozi's cafeteria business." Chen Xiangdong stared dead at his utterly arrogant, vile posture, his face remaining entirely placid as he countered, "Everyone earns their living based on their own merits. The workers genuinely love my food, so I can't exactly force them to stop coming, can I?" Wang Dabiao violently slapped his own thigh and roared, "Cut the absolute bullshit!" He pivoted his head around, tearing his vocal cords as he bellowed across the entire wholesale market. Wang Dabiao shouted, "Listen up, everyone. I am Wang Dabiao from the Steel Rolling Mills cafeteria. If a single one of you dares to sell Chen Xiangdong even a single leaf of vegetables today, I guarantee you will never see a single cent of profit from our cafeteria's massive orders ever again." The absolute microsecond those words left his mouth, the entire market fell into an eerie dead silence. The steel mill cafeteria was an absolute titan of a client, devouring hundreds of pounds of produce daily, meaning not a single soul present dared to cross him. The vendors immediately buried their heads, packing up their stalls as nobody dared to even look at Chen Xiangdong. Old Li was currently burying his face so deeply, it almost touched his knees. Wang Dabiao locked an intensely smug, triumphant glare onto Chen Xiangdong, mocking, "Little punk. You're still way too wet behind the ears to play games with me. I'm dying to see what garbage you're going to stir-fry today. Are you going to stir-fry the goddamn winter wind? Get the hell out of here and crawl back home to babysit your kid." Chen Xiangdong scanned the surrounding vendors who didn't dare to utter a single syllable, instantly realizing that as of today he wouldn't be able to buy a single scrap of rotten vegetable leaf in this entire market. Yet he didn't throw a tantrum, nor did he cause a scene, refusing to even waste his breath on throwing out empty threats. He aggressively kicked away Wang Dabiao's fat leg that was pinning his wheel, straddled his tricycle, spun it around, and bolted. Wang Dabiao let out a sharp yelp, nearly face-planting into the dirt like a dog eating trash, glaring at Chen Xiangdong's retreating figure while screaming, "You absolute piece of garbage." Wang Dabiao hopped up and down in a furious rage, shrieking after him, "I can't wait to see how the hell you're going to set up your stand tomorrow." Chen Xiangdong slammed his feet onto the pedals, launching the tricycle out of the wholesale market and charging straight toward the Shilipu production brigade on the outskirts of the city. Shilipu was the undisputed absolute largest vegetable cultivation hub in the entire region, supplying over 80% of the wholesale market's total inventory. Wang Dabiao thought he could completely cut off his supply chain in his absolute dreams, after furiously pedaling for over 30 intense minutes. Chen Xiangdong finally arrived at the edge of the Shilipu farmlands. The exact moment he reached the entrance of the village, he spotted a frail, emaciated old man wearing a straw hat, crouching directly on a dirt ridge while puffing on a pipe of raw tobacco, groaning and sighing in deep, utter despair. Chen Xiangdong parked his ride and walked into the fields to take a closer look, instantly calculating the entire situation in his mind. Stretching out before him was a massive, sweeping field of cabbages, but the crops were growing in absolutely pathetic, miserable condition. Their leaves were heavily yellowed and curled up tightly, and the base of the stems released a sickening, putrid stench of rotten mud, with the cores of countless cabbages completely decayed and ruined. This old man was named Xu Changgui, the desperate production team leader of the Shilipu brigade. Watching this entire massive harvest literally rot away in the soil, Xu Changgui had been so intensely anxious for days that he couldn't even catch a single night of peaceful, decent sleep. Chen Xiangdong strode directly over to him, scooped up a handful of soil, crushed it between his fingers, and brought it to his nose to sniff, before plucking a yellowed cabbage leaf to inspect it carefully. Chen Xiangdong brushed the dirt off his hands and directly questioned, "Hey Grandpa, did you dump unfermented manure directly into this soil?" Xu Changgui jumped in pure shock, lifting his head to scrutinize this city slicker wearing a pristine white shirt, barking out in an incredibly annoyed tone, "Get lost, get lost, get lost. What does a privileged city brat know about farming? Stop trampling over my damn crops." Chen Xiangdong merely offered a calm, knowing smile. In his past life, after dominating the massive restaurant industry, he had personally managed thousands of acres of land for ecological agriculture, meaning he could dissect this minor issue with a single glance. Chen Xiangdong pointed at the decaying roots and stated, "Not only do I understand it, but I can also completely save this entire field of crops for you." Chen Xiangdong expanded, "Listen up, Grandpa. You dumped raw, unripened manure straight into the ground, causing it to ferment aggressively within the soil and generate extreme heat, which completely roasted and destroyed the cabbage roots from underneath. Combine that with the fact that you've been over-farming this exact plot for years, and the soil is completely drained of nutrients and severely lacking boron, which is the exact reason the leaves are curling up and turning yellow. Hearing this, Shu Changgui's jaw dropped so hard his pipe nearly smashed onto the ground. This young kid hadn't even dug into the earth. Yet with just a single glance and a quick sniff, he had completely hit the nail on the head. A few days ago, the agricultural expert from the township had inspected the field and said the exact same thing, concluding that there was zero hope and the only option left was to rip them out and replant. Su Changgui stood up with sudden, breathless urgency, tightly grabbing Chen Xiangdong's arm as he demanded, "Young man, do you seriously have a concrete method to save them?" Chen Xiangdong nodded confidently. "I absolutely do." Chen Xiangdong pointed toward a massive manure pit off in the distance, explaining raw manure can never be applied directly to crops. Have your men mix plant ash and rotten cabbage leaves right into the waste. But the absolute key is to head over to the supply and marketing cooperative to purchase calcium superphosphate, blend it in at a strict 10-to-1 ratio, and seal it completely under a plastic tarp for 3 days. Chen Xiangdong stated, "This is exactly what we call inorganic fermented fertilizer. Once it's completely fermented, dilute it heavily with water and irrigate the fields. And I guarantee the roots will strengthen while the leaves turn vibrant green. As for the boron deficiency, just buy some basic borax and dissolve it in water. Then use a backpack sprayer to coat the leaves directly. I promise you'll see a total transformation within 3 days flat." Su Changgui listened, his eyes completely wide open in absolute awe. Plant ash, calcium, superphosphate, and borax were all things he had vaguely heard of. But as for how to actually combine them, he had been entirely clueless. Yet Chen Xiangdong had just laid it out with absolute flawless precision. Su Changgui's voice was actively trembling with emotion as he asked, "Young man, will this method genuinely work?" Chen Xiangdong aggressively slapped his chest and declared, "If it fails, come straight to the city and find me. My name is Chen Xiangdong. However, Grandpa, now that I've handed over this god tier remedy, you and I need to strike a business deal." Su Changgui blurted out, "What kind of deal?" "As long as you can resuscitate this dying harvest, I'll literally do whatever you ask." Chen Xiangdong pointed directly at the neighboring fields where the crops were growing perfectly normally, saying, "Those flawless premium vegetables over there, the cucumbers, the potatoes, and the fresh bok choy must be supplied directly to me at a flat rate of 2 cents per pound. I'll ride over every single morning to haul them away, and it'll be a strict immediate cash-on-delivery settlement. Do we have a deal?" The standard wholesale market rate sat at 4 cents per pound, so slicing it down to 2 cents was a brutal, straight-up 50% haircut. But Shu Changgui was already drowning in anxiety over his inability to sell the crops, and combined with the fact that Chen Xiangdong had just gifted him a life-saving expert technique, he fiercely grit his teeth and slammed his hand onto his thigh. Shu Changgui barked, "It's a damn deal. Brother Chen, my man. As long as this method of yours actually delivers results, you can have absolute free reign to cherry-pick any produce in Shilipu, and we'll give it all to you for a flat 2 cents per pound." The duo immediately scrounged up pen and paper right there on the field, inked the formal contract, and aggressively stamped their thumbprints onto the sheet. Su Changgui immediately tore his vocal cords bellowing across the fields to summon several muscular, hard-working young farmhands. Su Changgui ordered with absolute urgency, "Go straight to the western fields and harvest the absolute finest crops immediately. Load them right up for Brother Chen." The young men moved with spectacular lightning-fast agility, and in a mere matter of minutes they harvested several hundred pounds of pristine dew-kissed vegetables. Crisp, prickly cucumbers still sporting fresh blossoms, insanely plump, watery bok choy, and freshly unearthed orchard potatoes were hoisted up basket after basket onto the tricycle bed. Su Changgui even explicitly ordered his men to pump fresh icy well water to douse over the greens, guaranteeing they would remain at peak crisp freshness. Chen Xiangdong whipped out his cash, settling the entire bill at the agreed 2 cents per pound, stacking the tricycle bed until it looked like a literal mountain. Chen Xiangdong shouted, "Grandpa, hurry up and put that method I told you about into action. I'll head back to check on things in 3 days flat." Chen Xiangdong straddled his tricycle, slammed his legs onto the pedals, and hummed a cheerful tune as he sped back toward the city. With Shilipu locked down as his direct exclusive supplier, he didn't just utterly crush Wang Dabiao's pathetic blockade. He also sliced his raw ingredient cost dead in half. This was an absolute god-tier victory. An hour later, Chen Xiangdong pedaled his vehicle back into the downtown district. The moment he passed right by the entrance of the agricultural wholesale market, Wang Dabiao was lounging on a folding stool, bragging loudly to the local vendors, eagerly waiting to laugh his ass off at Chen Xiangdong returning empty-handed. Hearing the sharp, distinctive screech of the tricycle chain, Wang Dabiao snapped his head up only to see Chen Xiangdong hauling an entire massive load of crisp, dew-covered premium vegetables right past him. Wang Dabiao's blood boiled so hard, he literally ground his teeth to dust. Whereas Chen Xiangdong pedaled his tricycle right into his courtyard, where Song Xiuyun immediately rushed out to greet him, staring at the overflowing cart of gorgeously fresh, vibrant greens. Her eyes lit up with sheer, unadulterated awe, and she immediately jumped in to help unload the haul. Song Xiuyun asked breathlessly, "Xiangdong, this produce is insanely fresh. That thug Wang Dabiao didn't cause any trouble for you, did he? This must have cost an absolute fortune, right?" Chen Xiangdong wiped a handful of sweat from his face, grinning ear to ear as he smirked. "Wang Dabiao isn't even worth a piece of crap. I bypassed him entirely and sourced these directly from the village farmlands, for a mere 2 cents a pound, more than 50% cheaper than that trash wholesale market." Hearing this, Song Xiuyun was so overwhelmed with joy that the rims of her eyes turned red, and she hurriedly pumped water to wash the greens. Chen Xiangdong sorted through the potatoes while calculating his next move. Relying solely on those basic 20-cent vegetarian box lunches was way too slow for stacking real cash. Now that his overhead costs had completely plummeted, it was time to upscale the menu and pump up the profit margins. Those factory workers ground through brutal, heavy manual labor, meaning they couldn't survive without solid protein. So he absolutely needed to introduce a flagship meat dish. No sooner said than done. He turned on his heel and headed straight to the back alley of the meat processing plant, pulling some strings to secure 10 pounds of premium, thick pork belly. This particular cut was incredibly cheap, and as long as the culinary technique was flawless, the resulting stew would taste 100 times more heavenly and savory than lean meat. The moment he returned home, Chen Xiangdong thoroughly scrubbed down the cutting board, gripped his chef's knife, and unleashed the full terrifying foundational skills of his past life as a legendary state banquet master chef. The chef's knife flashed across the cutting board, leaving behind a blur of silver remnants. 10 whole pounds of premium pork belly were utterly transformed in the blink of an eye into perfect mahjong tile-sized cubes, each individual piece showcasing a flawless, identical ratio of fat to lean meat. Next came the crisp white radishes, sliced with rapid rolling cuts so incredibly uniform and translucent that they piled up in the basin like a miniature snow-capped mountain. He sparked the fire beneath the stove, and the absolute moment the massive iron wok screeched with heat, Chen Xiangdong didn't even bother adding a single drop of cooking oil, directly dumping the pork belly straight into sear and render. The exact second the skin scorched against the blazing iron plumes of white smoke erupted. With a sudden violent flick of Chen Xiangdong's wrist, his massive iron ladle danced and flipped effortlessly throughout the deep wok, slowly coaxing the rich golden lard out of the meat drop by drop, until the outer surface of each cube turned beautifully golden brown and slightly curled, unleashing an intoxicating meaty aroma that drifted heavily through the rising steam. He expertly skimmed the excess lard off into a separate bowl, safekeeping it to stir-fry the green vegetables later, leaving absolutely nothing but a thin layer of base oil glistening in the wok. Next, he tossed in a handful of crystal rock sugar, which instantly dissolved into the hot oil, bubbling into tiny golden pockets of sweetness. Chen Xiangdong kept his eyes locked dead onto the center of the wok, and the exact millisecond the bubbles transformed into a deep, rich crimson, he hurled the seared pork belly back into the mix, tossing it aggressively a few times, until every single chunk of meat was completely glazed in a brilliant, jaw-dropping amber caramel coat, shimmering gorgeously under the reflection of the oil. Star anise cinnamon bark and aromatic bay leaves were cast into the inferno, followed by a splash of boiling water as he cranked the heat to a roaring boil before dropping it to a gentle, slow simmer. Half an hour later, with the meat perfectly braised to about 70% doneness, Chen Xiangdong dumped the mountain of white radishes straight into the pot. This was the absolute undisputed soul of a braised pork dish. Radishes were literal sponges for flavor, and tossing them into this rich braise allowed them to violently vacuum up every single drop of excess grease, guaranteeing the meat remained melt in your mouth tender without being greasy, while making the radishes themselves taste 100 times more savory than the actual meat. After letting it simmer for another 20 intense minutes, Chen Xiangdong triumphantly hoisted the heavy pot lid, and an absolute explosion of rich savory aroma blasted outward, cascading right over the courtyard walls and flooding the entire neighborhood. The thick gravy in the wok had reduced into a luscious, glaze-like consistency, bubbling and spitting heavily in the center of the heat, while the brilliant crimson-red pork belly jiggled delicately with life. The radish chunks had completely gorged themselves on the savory meat juices, transforming into a breathtaking semi-translucent soy sauce red. Song Xiuyun, who had been busy scrubbing laundry out in the courtyard, caught one whiff of the heavenly fragrance and completely dropped her wooden washing mallet right onto the dirt floor. Swallowing a heavy mouthful of saliva, she stammered, "Xiangdong? This is literally an absolute heaven-sent aromatic masterpiece." Chen Xiangdong picked up a piece of radish with his chopsticks, blew on it gently to cool it down, and stuffed it directly into Song Xiuyun's mouth, grinning, "Take a bite." The moment Song Xiuyun bit down on the incredibly tender, pillowy radish, her entire mouth was completely flooded with an explosion of savory meat flavor and luscious sweet juices. She was so completely stunned by the sheer deliciousness that words entirely failed her. and she could only frantically flash a massive thumbs up directly at Chen Xiangdong. Chen Xiangdong declared confidently, "Listen up, wifey. Today, we're officially stepping up our game and introducing premium meat dishes, priced at a flat 40 cents per portion." Chen Xiangdong transferred the massive haul of braised pork and radish into a giant iron container, wrapping it tightly with a thick quilted blanket to lock in the absolute peak temperature, before hoisting it onto his tricycle and gunning it straight toward the Red Star Machinery factory. The exact microsecond the lunch bell rang at 11:30 a.m. flat, a massive wave of workers clutching aluminum lunchboxes came surging wildly out of the factory gates. Chen Xiangdong parked his tricycle precisely at his usual spot, and, with one fluid motion, yanked off the quilted insulation blanket and slammed the container lid open. The absolute moment a gust of wind swept across the square. The intoxicating god-tier aroma of the braised pork drifted like a homing missile straight toward the crowd. The workers who were passively heading toward the cafeteria abruptly froze dead in their tracks, crying out in absolute shock, "What on earth is that heavenly scent? It smells insane." Another worker blurted out, "That's definitely premium meat. It smells 100 times better than the stew we make for Lunar New Year." Dozens of hungry souls instantly swarmed the area following the scent until they traced it right to Chen Xiangdong's stand. The moment they laid eyes on the food, their eyeballs literally popped out of their skulls. Inside the giant iron container, the glistening amber-glazed braised pork and radishes were aggressively steaming, and the sheer depth of that rich color looked absolutely criminally delicious. A young worker swallowed a massive lump of spit and questioned breathlessly, "Yo, boss Chen, you've actually got meat on the menu today. What's the damage? How much for a plate?" Chen Xiangdong projected his voice across the crowd. "Listen up, the standard vegetarian lunch is still a flat 20 cents. But with this flagship braised pork and radish combo, it's 40 cents a portion." A wave of hesitant murmurs immediately rippled through the gathered crowd. Someone muttered, "40 cents feels a bit too steep, man. Even the factory cafeteria only charges 35 cents for a meat dish." Another echoed the sentiment, saying, "Yeah, he's right. 40 cents is literally enough to buy an entire pound of raw rice." Chen Xiangdong didn't waste a single millisecond trying to argue. He merely grabbed his massive iron ladle and scooped up a spectacularly overflowing portion right from the barrel. Half a ladle of glistening, gelatinous, perfectly jiggling pork belly, and half a ladle of radishes completely gorged on savory broth, along with a generous pour of the rich reduced gravy, smothering it directly over a fresh box of steaming white rice sitting on the counter. Chen Xiangdong announced loudly, "The absolute first portion today is completely on the house. Who's brave enough to give it a taste test?" "Oh." Someone roared from the back of the line, "I'll do it." Old Lee, who had bought the stir-fried shredded potatoes the previous day, elbowed his way straight to the front and eagerly snatched up the lunchbox. He picked up a massive piece of meat with his chopsticks. He carefully picked up a savory morsel with his chopsticks, shoving the deep amber radish straight into his mouth, taking a couple of quick bites, and his eyes violently popped wide open in absolute unadulterated shock. Old Lee let out a frantic booming screech, "Holy Mother of God, this is insane," before instantly shoveling a massive overflowing mouthful of gravy-soaked white rice right behind it. The crowd surrounding him grew intensely impatient and anxious, demanding, "Old Lee, what the hell are you screaming for? Is it actually good or what the?" Old Lee literally could not find the time or breath to utter a single word of response, shoveling the remaining half box of food down his throat in 2 or 3 savage bites, going so far as to lick every single drop of grease completely clean off the bottom of the tin. He aggressively wiped his mouth with his sleeve, whipped out an 80-cent note, and slammed it down hard onto the wooden cardboard. Old Lee bellowed, "It's delicious. It is so goddamn phenomenal, it's criminal. The exact second you bite that radish, a burst of rich broth erupts, and it honestly tastes even more heavenly than the actual meat." He demanded Boss Chen slap down another 2 full portions immediately, stating he absolutely had to carry them home for his wife to taste. Witnessing Old Lee's completely unhinged feral reaction, the surrounding workers completely lost their minds and could no longer sit still. Someone screamed, "Give me a 40-cent portion right now." Another voice roared, "I need an order too. Make sure you drench it in extra savory meat gravy." Yet another soul shrieked, "Stop shoving, stop shoving. I was clearly here first." Chen Xiangdong operated with spectacular lightning-fast agility, raking in the cold hard cash with one hand while plating the food with the other. Every single scoop of his heavy ladle yielded a massive, honest portion of meat and radish, with absolutely zero stingy hand-trembling games. The workers clutched their lunchboxes, squatting right along the curb as they dug in like starving beasts. One remarked, "This is incredibly savory. The pork is remarkably rich, yet doesn't feel heavy or greasy at all. It's perfection." Another blurted out, "This radish is an absolute masterpiece. I swear on my life, I have never tasted a radish this god tier in my entire existence." Word of mouth spread like wildfire, exploding from 10 to 100 in seconds. The workers who were just exiting the facility gates heard rumors that a legendary god-level braised pork and radish combo was stationed at the entrance, bypassing the cafeteria entirely, and sprinting at full speed toward the main gates, in under 10 minutes flat. A gargantuan serpentine line formed right in front of Chen Xiangdong's tricycle, the massive queue wrapping around the corner and stretching for well over 100 meters, forming a dense black sea of hungry bodies. This sheer, unprecedented spectacle caused the neighboring bun vendor to stare in total slack-jawed bewilderment. Right at that exact moment, on the second floor of the Red Star Machinery Factory's main office building, factory director Yang Jiangguo was reviewing files, when his stomach let out two loud, rumbling growls of hunger. He strolled over to the window to check what the cafeteria was serving up today. But the moment he looked down, he saw the main factory gates completely gridlocked and bursting at the seams, with a line far longer than the legendary crowds that queued up for meat rations during Lunar New Year. A heavy, intoxicating wave of savory meat aroma drifted right through the cracks of the window, viciously triggering Yang Jiangguo's appetite and making him swallow his spit. Yang Jiangguo hollered toward the door, "Secretary Liu, get in here." Xiao Liu pushed the door open, entering to ask, "Director, what do you need from me?" Yang Jiangguo gestured toward the window and questioned, "What the hell is going on at the main gate? Why on earth are so many people swarming the entrance?" He ordered Xiao Liu to check out the situation immediately, and to fetch 2 portions of whatever food was causing that riot while he was at it. This god-tier fragrance was testing him so badly he couldn't even focus on his official files. Xiao Liu quickly complied, "Understood, Director. I'll head down right this second." Xiao Liu jogged down the stairs and squeezed through the dense crowd only to find that the source of the chaos was actually a tiny street food box lunch stand, staring at the absolute bottom of the container, where the very last remnants of braised pork and radish remained. Xiao Liu frantically whipped out his cash, declaring, "I'm buying out these final 2 portions right now." Chen Xiangdong operated with fluid, practiced speed scraping every last drop of the rich meat and thick gravy completely clean, sealing them into 2 aluminum lunchboxes before handing them over to Xiao Liu. Xiao Liu grabbed the containers, and catching a direct whiff of the intense, heavenly meat fragrance wafting from within, he swallowed a massive greedy gulp of saliva, clutching the box lunches tightly as he sprinted at top speed back toward the office building, bursting through the office door completely out of breath. Xiao Liu gasped, "Director, I secured them. These were literally the last 2 portions available. I almost lost them to the crowd." Oh. Yang Jiangguo was already so starving that his stomach was practically glued to his spine. So he waved his hand frantically for Xiao Liu to drop the food, aggressively yanking off the lid. An absolute explosion of deep caramelized braised pork fragrance, and rich soy gravy forcefully assaulted his nostrils. He swallowed hard to suppress his hunger, picking up a massive chunk of pork belly and stuffing it straight into his mouth. The skin was spectacularly gelatinous and soft. The rich fat completely melted the instant it touched his tongue, and the lean meat was so perfectly infused with savory broth that it practically dissolved without effort. Yang Jiangguo's eyes popped wide open in absolute stunned disbelief, shoveling 2 massive consecutive mouthfuls of gravy-soaked white rice right behind it. He then picked up a glistening piece of radish, and the exact moment he bit down, a torrent of rich broth erupted in his mouth, the fresh sweet flavor effortlessly cutting through and neutralizing any heavy grease from the pork. In under 5 minutes flat, he had demolished the entire box lunch down to the very last grain, even using a final scoop of rice to wipe the container bottom completely clean. He finally laid down his chopsticks, grabbing a towel to wipe his mouth as he exhaled a long, deeply satisfied breath. Yang Jiangguo pointed directly at the empty lunchbox and marveled, "Xiao Liu, my boy, this culinary skill is an absolute, undisputed masterpiece. When I attended that high-level provincial conference last year and dined at the prestigious State Guest House, even the elite master chef's signature braised pork couldn't hold a candle to this flavor profile." Xiao Liu, standing off to the side with his mouth completely slick and glistening with grease, nodded frantically in agreement, chiming in, "The director hits the nail dead on the head. This flavor is an absolute, unparalleled masterpiece. No wonder those workers outside are fighting like literal wild animals for a taste." Meanwhile, things out at the main factory gates were far from peaceful. Chen Xiangdong was currently humming a cheerful little tune, expertly and efficiently packing away his entirely emptied iron containers. The heavy canvas bag slung around his waist was bulging aggressively, stuffed to the brim with a massive hoard of small denomination bills. Based on a quick mental calculation, the single lunch rush alone had netted him an insane sum of well over 100 yuan, in an era where the average individual's monthly income hovered around a meager 30 yuan. This was an absolute undisputed fortune. Just as he grabbed a rag preparing to give his tricycle chassis a thorough wipe down, a sudden grating voice blasted through the air like a broken gong, roaring, "Stop right there! Halt, all ears!" A harsh, aggressive voice demanded, "Who the hell gave you permission to set up a rogue stand in this area?" Chen Xiangdong pivoted his head around to look, spotting 3 imposing men aggressively storming over in his direction. The ringleader was an incredibly obese slub, donning a heavily yellow, grease-stained chef's white coat, his massive belly protruding so violently it threatened to pop the button straight off. while the savage rolls of fat on his face quivered with rage. Chen Xiangdong recognized this clown instantly. It was none other than Wang Dabiao, the corrupt contractor who ran the factory's first cafeteria. Right behind Wang Dabiao's bulky frame marched two young thugs wearing the official uniforms of the factory's security section, sporting bright red armbands. Looking completely high and mighty as they stared down through their nostrils, Wang Dabiao lunged straight into his personal space, thrusting a stubby fat finger directly in front of Chen Xiangdong's nose. Basking, "You've got some absolute suicidal nerve, kid. How dare you infiltrate my personal territory to hijack my damn business?" He aggressively demanded to see a valid business license, bellowing that this operation was nothing but an illegal black market hustle. Chen Xiangdong didn't display a single shred of panic, locking a dead freezing glare directly onto Wang Dabiao. In his past life, this exact scumbag Wang Dabiao had run the factory cafeteria completely into the dirt, shamelessly skimming off the workers' food budget, before ultimately embezzling a massive lump sum of cash and vanishing into thin air. He was a thorough, unadulterated piece of trash through and through. Chen Xiangdong violently slapped his cleaning rag down onto the cart, countering coldly, "The factory entrance is a public road. Since when did public property magically become your personal kingdom?" He added that he was merely prepping meals to sell to hard-working laborers after their shifts, demanding on what ground that was considered a crime. Wang Dabiao was so completely consumed by rage that the heavy fat on his face shook uncontrollably, bellowing that the kid actually had the audacity to talk back, and claiming he was explicitly sabotaging the operational order of the facility. He barked at Xiao Li and Xiao Zhao to completely smash this rogue stand to pieces, and to permanently confiscate every single pot pan and utensil. The exact microsecond those words left his mouth, the lanky, aggressive enforcement thug, Xiao Li lunged forward like a rabid dog, hoisting his heavy-soled leather boot and delivering a violent savage kick straight into the tricycle's front tire, unleashing a dull, heavy thud. Xiao Li cursed aggressively, snarling, "Get your pathetic ass out of here right now. Did you hear me, you piece of trash?" Xiao Li aggressively lunged his hands forward to grab the massive iron wastewater barrel on the cart, which was completely filled to the brim with scalding oily soap residue and leftover greasy broth. An incredibly hot, slick cocktail. Chen Xiangdong's gaze instantly turned ice cold. Having lived through 2 entire lifetimes, what kind of unhinged chaos had he not witnessed in the culinary trenches? Dealing with a low-level, brainless thug like this required absolutely zero brute force. Instead of retreating, he took a calculated, aggressive step forward, firmly locking his hand onto the main handle of the iron wastewater barrel. Chen Xiangdong projected his voice, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Comrade, let's just use our words. There's absolutely no need to get violent here." This explosive roar was so incredibly loud that it instantly caught the attention of all the nearby workers who hadn't walked away yet. Seeing that the vendor actually dared to defend his property, Xiao Li's fury completely boiled over, slamming both hands onto the rim of the barrel and pulling it violently toward his side. Xiao Li grit his teeth, pouring every ounce of his body weight into a backward yank, roaring, "I said, let go of the damn bucket." Chen Xiangdong locked onto the absolute split-second window of opportunity, skillfully flicking his wrist with precise leverage, and completely let go of his grip, perfectly riding the momentum of Xiao Li's violent pull, while simultaneously delivering a subtle upward nudge right against the base of the barrel. With a spectacular, deafening splash, a massive wave of scalding, incredibly greasy wastewater erupted outward, completely missing Chen Xiangdong by a mile, and showering directly onto the concrete floor right beneath Xiao Li's feet. The concrete ground was already perfectly smooth, and the moment it was heavily blanketed in slick lard and soapy fluid, it instantly transformed into a treacherous, frictionless ice rink. Xiao Li was still throwing his entire massive momentum backward, so the exact millisecond his boot stepped right into the greasy oil slick, his equilibrium completely shattered. Xiao Li's feet flew straight out from under him, sending his upper body tilting violently backward, before crashing heavily onto the hard pavement in a brutal, pathetic wipeout. He let out a sharp, agonized screech, the back of his skull violently bouncing off the concrete, leaving him clutching his head and groaning in absolute agony as he rolled around in the greasy wastewater, leaving him completely paralyzed and unable to stand up for ages. Wang Dabiao and the remaining enforcement officers stood there entirely paralyzed, completely dumbfounded by the sight, before their sluggish brains could even process what had just happened. Chen Xiangdong aggressively kicked over an empty aluminum basin sitting nearby, sending it clattering and rolling loudly across the hard concrete ground a massive distance away. Riding the momentum of the chaos, Chen Xiangdong threw himself straight onto the dirt floor, clutching his forearm as he projected his voice to an absolute scream, bellowing, "The security section is brutalizing citizens. These corrupt officials are actively oppressing the common folk. Smashed my entire business livelihood to pieces, and that wasn't even enough. Now they're resorting to raw violence." The exact millisecond those booming, desperate cries echoed through the open air, the surrounding swarm of factory workers instantly rushed back, encircling the scene, having just devoured that god-tier, mind-blowing box lunch. Their stomachs were full of rich food and their hearts filled with deep gratitude. So the absolute moment they witnessed this pathetic ambush, their collective fury violently spiked to an absolute boiling point. A worker roared from the crowd, "What the hell do you think you're doing, Wang Dabiao? You absolute piece of human garbage. Bringing muscle to go and vandalize someone's honest business." Another worker chimed in aggressively, "The absolute slop you serve in the factory cafeteria tastes like actual pig feed. This man finally cooks up something genuinely delicious." The gathered laborers stepped forward, aggressively interrogating Wang Dabiao. "By what right are you stopping him from selling food, Ishik?" Yet another voice boomed, "And on what grounds does the security section get to beat up citizens? Do you clowns seriously think you own this entire factory?" In the literal blink of an eye, hundreds of enraged workers had completely cornered Wang Dabiao and his thugs, trapping them in a suffocating, impenetrable wall of bodies. Several hot-tempered senior operators aggressively rolled up their sleeves, thrusting their fingers straight into Wang Dabiao's nose while hurling curses. Wang Dabiao was sweating bullets from sheer terror, stumbling backward repeatedly as he stammered, "Don't you dare do anything reckless. We are strictly handling official business here. This little punk is running an illegal black market street hustle." An elder worker spat a massive wad of phlegm directly onto Wang Dabiao's shoe, roaring, "Bullshit, keep your mouth shut, eat." The veteran glared, daggers demanding, "We are paying our own cash to buy food and eat. What law says, that's a crime." Just as the entire scene was on the verge of collapsing into a massive riot, a booming authoritative roar cut through the chaos from the outer edge of the crowd, commanding everyone cease this violence at once. The workers snapped their heads around to look, instantly parting like the Red Sea to clear a wide path. Factory director Yang Jianguo stepped forward with an incredibly grim, thunderous expression, his hands locked behind his back as he marched into the center of the fray, with Secretary Liu following right behind his heels like a shadow. The absolute millisecond the workers realized the big boss had arrived, the chaotic screaming crowd plunged into a dead, tense silence. Yang Jianguo swept his freezing gaze across the utterly vandalized, chaotic mess of the food stand, taking in the sight of the grease-covered, wailing enforcement thug, Xiao Li, before finally shifting his eyes over to Chen Xiangdong, who was still staging his protest on the ground. The exact second Wang Dabiao laid eyes on Yang Jianguo, he treated him like an absolute savior, frantically pushing through the crowd to completely flip the script and play the victim. Wang Dabiao projected his grating voice, whining directly to the director. "Sir, this punk is running an illegal, unlicensed street racket right at our facility gates, and he literally, physically assaulted the officers of our security section. Just look at how brutally he thrashed poor Xiao Li." Yang Jianguo gave Wang Dabiao the absolute silent treatment, ignoring him completely, as he locked his eyes directly onto Chen Xiangdong. Chen Xiangdong calmly patted the dust right off his pants, stood up tall, and addressed him, "Director Yang, my name is Chen Xiangdong, and I'm just a recently laid-off laborer trying to survive. I prepped some home-cooked meals to sell to the workers. I didn't steal and I didn't rob anyone yet. This supervisor brought muscle to aggressively vandalize my cart and even tried to permanently confiscate my cooking equipment." He pointed a mocking finger down at the groaning Xiao Li, adding, "The guy simply threw too much brute force into his own tantrum, stepped right into the wastewater slick and wiped himself out. Hundreds of factory workers present on the scene can serve as my witness. I didn't lay a single finger on him." The gathered laborers instantly roared back in unison, backing him up. "That's 100% true. We all saw the whole thing go down with our own eyes." The clown completely tripped over his own feet. Another worker shouted, "Wang Dabiao is just insanely jealous because this man's business is actually booming." Yang Jianguo whipped his head around, locking a dead lethal glare directly onto Wang Dabiao, his eyes so intensely cold it was terrifying. He barked out, "Wang Dabiao." Yang Jianguo interrogated him fiercely. "Who the hell gave you the authority to mobilize the security section to go around destroying people's property? Since when do you own the public space outside this factory?" Wang Dabiao violently shuddered from sheer panic, stammering out, but director, he's actively sabotaging and stealing our cafeteria's business." Yang Jianguo countered fiercely, "Stealing your business? The government is actively encouraging citizens to be self-reliant and build their own livelihoods right now, instead of properly managing your own damn cafeteria. You have the audacity to come out here and play the big shot." Yang Jianguo thrust his finger directly into Wang Dabiao's nose, cursing him out. "The absolute garbage slop your cafeteria cooks up has the workers cursing your name every single day. If you actually have this much leftover time and energy, get your ass back into that kitchen and figure out how to properly fry a dish." Wang Dabiao was blasted so brutally he didn't dare utter a single syllable, keeping his head completely buried, too terrified to let out a single peep. Yang Jianguo commanded coldly, "Take your pathetic goons and beat it back inside." Yang Jianguo barked at them, ordering them to take their pathetic lackeys and get the hell out of there. "And I expect a full written self-reflection report sitting on my desk first thing tomorrow morning." Yang Jianguo commanded with a massive authoritative wave of his hand. Wang Dabiao frantically hauled the groaning Xiao Li off the asphalt, leading his pathetic entourage as they fled the scene like beaten dogs. The surrounding crowd of factory workers instantly erupted into a wave of mocking laughter. Yang Jianguo turned back around to face Chen Xiangdong, the stern tension on his face giving way to a subtle warm smile as he asked, "Young man, did you cook up that legendary braised pork and radish combo yourself?" Chen Xiangdong gave a firm nod and replied, "Yes, director, I did." Director Yang Jianguo praised, "Your culinary skills are absolutely outstanding. Our workers engage in backbreaking manual labor every day, so they absolutely deserve high-quality nourishment to sustain their bodies." Yang Jianguo raised his arm pointing directly at a prime open space right next to the security guard station, declaring, "Starting first thing tomorrow morning, you set up your food stand right over there. This is my official personal approval for your business. If anyone else ever tries to give you trouble again..." Yang Jianguo patted his chest with absolute ironclad assurance, vowing, "If anyone attempts to harass you, tell them to march their asses straight to my office." Chen Xiangdong replied with a resounding grateful shout, "Thank you so much, director." The surrounding workers instantly erupted into a thunderous, ecstatic roar of applause. The exact second the afternoon lunch bell echoed across the campus, a massive dark sea of laborers surged wildly through the factory gates. The workers didn't even waste a single microsecond washing the grease off their skin, clutching their aluminum lunchboxes as they sprinted frantically toward the food stand. In under 10 minutes flat, a staggering serpentine queue stretching well over 200 meters had formed. However, with an overwhelming surge of customers came a brand new operational bottleneck. Chen Xiangdong and Song Xiuyun were each stationed behind two massive iron basins, one aggressively serving the rice while the other plated the savory dishes. A worker covered in dark soot bellowed from the middle of the line, "Boss Chen, give me an extra ladle of that thick gravy to soak into my rice." Chen Xiangdong dipped his massive iron ladle deep into the steaming pot, relying purely on muscle memory to gauge the portions with the round spoon. He had to expertly drain the excess grease against the rim before flipping the contents into the lunchbox, all while remaining incredibly cautious not to let the scalding broth spill and burn anyone. This intricate sequence of movements alone ate up a precious 4 to 5 seconds per person. Song Xiuyun's side of the operation was proving to be an even greater physical ordeal. The giant iron basin was simply too deep, and the cooked rice was packed so densely that she had to repeatedly hunch her back and exert intense physical force just to scoop it out. Once dug out, she had to aggressively shake the spoon to level the portion, leaving her drenched in sweat after serving only a mere fraction of the crowd, her forearms trembling violently from raw exhaustion. The blazing sun overhead was absolutely merciless, and the waiting workers grew increasingly irritable and anxious from the oppressive heat, frantically wiping sweat off their necks with damp towels. The massive line crawled forward at a literal snail's pace, causing the hungry laborers stuck at the very back to completely lose their patience. Someone shouted, "Oh, for the love of God! How long are we supposed to wait in this endless line? Our entire lunch break is only 1 miserable hour. By the time we actually get our food, it'll be time to clock back into work." Another field operator grumbled, forget it, I'm out of here. But how the hell am I supposed to survive the afternoon shift on an empty stomach? Guess I'll just have to go swallow that cafeteria slop to stay alive. Seeing that at the absolute tail end of the massive queue, frustrated workers were already abandoning the line in small groups and walking away. Song Xiuyun's eyes instantly turned red with overwhelming anxiety. While frantically scooping out the rice, she cried out, "Xiangdong! People are leaving. Those are our potential profits, walking right out the door." Chen Xiangdong's hands didn't slow down for a single fraction of a second, but his brow furrowed intensely into a tight knot. According to a quick mental calculation, solely because their plating speed was bottlenecked, the number of paying customers they had lost during this lunch rush was at least 50 or 60, with each box lunch priced at over 1 yuan. That single delay had instantly cost them a staggering 70 or 80 yuan in lost revenue. Later that evening, back at the house, Song Xiuyun was completely shattered from raw physical exhaustion, collapsing into a chair, without even enough leftover strength to lift her forearms. Chen Xiangdong carefully organized the massive stack of small bills into a wooden storage box, before pulling out a clean piece of rigid cardboard, and using a pencil to aggressively map out detailed structural schematics. Song Xiuyun leaned over out of sheer curiosity, inquiring, "Xiangdong, what on earth are you drawing?" Chen Xiangdong gestured directly toward the cardboard, blueprints, and smirked, "I'm designing an absolute money-making cheat code." He explained, "Our current method of scooping food straight out of deep iron basins is a massive bottleneck. We need to build a specialized rig to drastically optimize our workflow speed." In his previous life, he had climbed the ranks to become an elite state banquet chef, and later successfully launched a massive commercial fast food franchise empire. The blueprints for modern high-efficiency assembly line food warmers were something he could literally map out flawlessly with his eyes closed. On the heavy paper, he sketched out a massive rectangular stainless steel holding tank, subdividing the entire framework into 6 precise rectangular slots, with each specific compartment meticulously calibrated to hold a standard industrial stainless steel food tray. Chen Xiangdong guided Xuyun through the layout, explaining, "This is what we call a multi-compartment steam table. By aligning all the hot dishes in a single streamlined row, we eliminate the need to waste precious seconds turning around to locate items. But here is where the real genius lies." Chen Xiangdong added a specialized hollow insulation layer at the absolute base of the framework, creating a sealed chamber underneath, stating that once they fill it with boiling water from below, the food trays will rest directly over the rising steam, ensuring that, no matter how long we operate out in the open, every single dish will remain piping hot and fresh. Song Xiuyun listened intently, her eyes violently lighting up with sheer awe, exclaiming that this strategy was absolute genius, as they wouldn't have to constantly keep the food perched directly over a live gas stove, and it would permanently prevent the stews from burning and sticking to the bottom. Chen Xiangdong smiled and added, "But wait, there's more, take a look at this," as he began sketching a strangely shaped utensil right next to the main schematics. The ladle didn't possess a traditional rounded bottom. Instead, it featured a perfectly flat base with straight cylindrical walls, connected to an extended handle. This bad boy is a standardized portion control scoop. One single dip into the tray fills it completely to the brim, yielding the exact perfect amount required for a single serving. No more eyeballing the portions, and absolutely no more wasting precious seconds draining excess broth. You do just scoop the food out and dump it straight into their lunchbox, clean and simple. Song Xiuyun excitedly slapped her thigh, gasping, "Oh my god!" With a specialized tool like this in our hands, we could literally serve these dishes flawlessly with our eyes closed. First thing the following morning, Chen Xiangdong carefully tucked the detailed blueprints into his pocket, grabbed 2 premium packs of Dekiamen cigarettes, and bolted straight toward the factory residential quarters to track down Old Zhao, an elite Tier 8 master machinist and the finest artisan in the facility. Old Zhao was currently hunkered down beside an outdoor water trough brushing his teeth, his mouth completely overflowing with white foam. Chen Xiangdong glided over smoothly, slipping the premium cigarettes directly into the man's pocket, before sliding the detailed blueprints right into his hands. Chen Xiangdong smirked, saying, "Uncle Zhao, I need a massive favor from the master. I need you to salvage some scrap stainless steel and weld a custom rig for me." Old Zhao thoroughly rinsed his mouth out, holding up the blueprints and squinting at the schematics for an extended moment, his brow contorting into a tightly knotted frown. Old Zhao marveled, "Kid, what the hell is going on inside that brain of yours? I've been working as a machinist for over 30 years and I've never seen a contraption like this. This massive holding tank actually requires a fully sealed water jacket. If the welded seams are even a microscopic fraction off, the water will leak right out and the entire unit will be utterly ruined." Chen Xiangdong laughed, replying, "And that is precisely why I brought this project to a master. Who in this entire facility doesn't know about Uncle Zhao's legendary craftsmanship? The seams you weld with your eyes closed are so insanely flawless you couldn't even force a single strand of hair through them." Old Zhao was thoroughly flattered by the praise, his mood instantly soaring, as he slapped his thigh and barked, "All right, you've got a deal. The factory warehouse just happens to have a batch of decommissioned stainless steel scraps, and the metal plating on those sheets is incredibly thick and durable." Old Zhao patted his chest with absolute ironclad confidence, vowing that he would have the entire custom unit fabricated and ready before the midday rush. Old Zhao snapped on his heavy protective goggles, firing up his industrial welding torch, as blinding electric sparks began erupting and flying wildly across the workshop. In under a single morning's worth of intense fabrication, the masterfully crafted custom rig was officially completed. By exactly 11:30 a.m., Old Zhao came pedaling over on a heavy-duty tricycle, hauling a gleaming, brilliantly polished stainless steel behemoth straight to the vending spot. The two men pooled their strength to hoist the massive steam table onto the long wooden counter, measuring well over a meter in length and half a meter in width. This structural masterpiece featured 6 perfectly symmetrical, flawless rectangular compartments. Chen Xiangdong lifted 2 massive kettles of violently boiling water and poured them directly into the insulation layer through the dedicated inlet valves. Within a mere matter of seconds, thick swirling plumes of hot steam began rising through the gaps of the compartments. Chen Xiangdong immediately took his freshly cooked legendary braised pork, the fiery hot and sour shredded potatoes, and the savory braised cabbage with tofu, dumping them into the industrial trays, before smoothly slotting them into the steaming matrix. The instant the hot steam permeated the dishes, an absolutely intoxicating culinary aroma exploded outward, piercing everyone's nostrils. He then picked up the specialized, custom-forged, flat-bottomed portion scoop Old Zhao had meticulously hammered out, testing its balance with a few quick flicks of his wrist. The ergonomics and weight distribution were absolute perfection. The midday factory bell finally rang out, and the massive wave of workers surged past the main gates, but the moment they arrived at the stand, the entire crowd froze dead in their tracks from pure shock. The clunky deep iron basins that previously cluttered the counter had completely vanished. replaced by a gleaming, futuristic metallic workstation erupting with thick steam. A young laborer craned his neck forward to catch a closer glimpse, exclaiming, "Boss Chen, what kind of insane high-tech sorcery is this? It looks absolutely intimidating." Chen Xiangdong rhythmically tapped the edge of the metal table with his iron scoop, announcing at the top of his lungs, "All right, everyone, get into an orderly queue. We've deployed a brand new setup today," Chen Xiangdong confidently declared, "and I guarantee every single person in line will be eating within 5 minutes flat, yo." The skeptical workers formed a massive line, eager to see if he could back up his claims. Chen Xiangdong locked into position right behind the hot steam table, while Song Xiuyun stood guard over the giant rice container, with a perfectly smooth, continuous stainless steel track extending across their front. Chen Xiangdong barked out, "First up, what's your order?" The worker standing at the very front of the queue shouted, "Give me a double serving of the braised pork and a portion of the shredded potatoes," as he handed over his aluminum container. Song Xiuyun snatched the lunchbox with lightning speed, plunging her massive wooden scoop deep into the rice barrel to extract a perfectly rounded mountain of fluffy rice, slamming it dead center into the container. Without lifting the box, she smoothly launched it across the slick stainless steel track, sending the lunchbox gliding effortlessly down the assembly line. Chen Xiangdong caught the sliding lunchbox firmly with his left hand, while his right hand seamlessly plunged the flat-bottomed scoop into the hot trays. He plunged the custom scoop seamlessly into the steaming braised pork slot, hoisting it back up perfectly leveled and filled right to the brim. With a lightning-fast flick of his wrist, he slammed the savory contents directly onto the fresh bed of rice. The rich aromatic gravy cascaded beautifully over the pearly white grains, unleashing an absolute flavor bomb of pure culinary aroma. Without missing a beat, his scoop glided fluidly into the shredded potato compartment, depositing another perfect portion in one seamless, incredibly precise sequence of movements, executed with absolutely zero hesitation. 1 microsecond to slide the box, 2 seconds to drop the perfect side dishes, and within a mere 3 seconds flat, the lunchbox was pushed back into the hands of the stunned worker. Chen Xiangdong barked out, "Grab your food." Next, the worker holding the container stood there completely paralyzed, staring down at the massive, overflowing mountain of food in his hands, before looking back up at Chen Xiangdong, his jaw dropping straight to the floor, as he stammered, "Holy Mother of God, this speed is absolutely demonic." Chen Xiangdong aggressively urged, "Next up, state your order." The next worker yelled, "Tofu and sliced meat. Slide the box, scoop the food. Slam it down, and hand it off." Another lightning-fast 3-second rotation completed. The massive queue began surging forward at an incredibly visible pace. Where waiting in line had previously felt like an agonizing snail's crawl, it had now transformed into an absolute sprint. The hungry laborers had barely even locked into their spots in queue, without even having a single second to strike up a casual chat, before they suddenly found themselves standing right at the front of the line. The workers marveled in absolute amazement. "Oh my God, this serving speed is straight up supernatural." The laborers gossiped excitedly among themselves, saying, "Look at that specialized cylindrical scoop in Boss Chen's hand. One single dip yields the exact amount every time, and he doesn't spill a single drop of that precious gravy." Others chimed in, "You're damn right. Just look at that clown Wang Dabiao over at the primary cafeteria. Every single time he handles the ladle, his hands shake like he's going through severe withdrawal, twitching 3 times just to deliberately drop all the actual meat back into his own pot." The workers praised, "Boss Chen's custom ladle is the real deal. One solid scoop gives you an honest, massive portion with 0 games or osito." The laborers eagerly devoured their meals while engaging in hyped conversations, as the custom steam table glinted brilliantly under the dazzling sunlight. The boiling water insulation layer kept the dishes intensely hot and fresh, ensuring that even the cooked vegetable leaves were piping hot when hitting their tongues, making the entire dining experience incredibly satisfying and euphoric. A massive crowd of over 500 hungry workers, which just yesterday would have taken the duo over an hour of backbreaking, exhausting labor to serve, was handled completely differently today, as the endless queue was entirely cleared out in under 30 minutes flat. Every single one of the 6 steel compartments was scraped absolutely bone dry, and even the veteran laborers who usually bitched the loudest about the agonizing wait times were happily hunkered down beneath the cool tree shade today, devouring their meals with grease glistening all over their lips, as they thrust enthusiastic thumbs-up signs straight toward Chen Xiangdong. When it was finally time to pack up the stand, Song Xiuyun clutched the heavy iron cash box, both of her hands trembling violently from raw adrenaline. The container was completely bursting at the seams with a chaotic nest of colorful bills, ranging from small changes of 1 and 2 dimes, all the way to large crisp bills of 1 and 2 yuan. Song Xiuyun swallowed hard, her throat tight, and her voice noticeably shaking with excitement, gasping, "Xiangdong, all 500 portions are entirely sold out." Song Xiuyun continued in sheer disbelief. Not a single paying customer abandoned the queue halfway through today. Chen Xiangdong aggressively wiped down the custom steam table until it was absolutely gleaming, and looking over at his wife's ecstatic flushed face. He smirked and replied, "Babe, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now that we've unlocked this ultimate serving rig, forget about a mere 500 customers. Even if 1,000 hungry workers show up at once, we'll handle them effortlessly." By 11 p.m. that night, inside their cramped apartment, old newspapers were spread across the wooden table, buried beneath an absolute mountain of paper bills and loose coins. Sung Soo-yoon sat perched before the desk, her fingers moving at blinding speed as she sorted through the massive pile of cash, meticulously organizing the dimes, quarters, and half-yuan bills into neat, crisp stacks. She counted the grand total over and over again, her eyes intensely reflecting the literal glow of the money. "Xiangdong, we moved over 500 box lunches during the midday rush alone. And after deducting the raw cost of the fresh produce and meat, we cleared a net profit of over 130 yuan." Song Soo-yoon's voice was completely hoarse from screaming all day, clutching a thick wad of small bills tightly in her fist, shaking violently with raw adrenaline as she gasped, "Oh my god, back when I was slaving away at the factory for a whole month, working myself to the bone only yielded a miserable 30 yuan. Our single afternoon earnings literally completely eclipsed half a year of my old salary." Chen Xiangdong brought over a wash basin filled with steaming hot water, placing it right by her feet, soothingly saying, "All right, calm down, that cash isn't going to sprout wings and fly away. Soak your exhausted feet first." Song Soo-yoon carefully locked the mountain of cash inside the iron box, slipping off her shoes to submerge her feet into the basin. The instant the scalding water enveloped her skin, she let out a deeply euphoric, relaxed sigh, but her head immediately began to heavy nod, her exhausted body tilting precariously as she nearly collapsed sideways. Chen Xiangdong caught her firmly by the shoulders, stabilizing her weight, and when he leaned down to check on her, he realized Song Soo-yoon had completely passed out cold against his arm, deep dark purple bruises of profound exhaustion completely framing the contours of her eyes. Her fragile hands had been submerged in icy water for hours cleaning raw vegetables, leaving the skin utterly wrinkled, bleached, and ghostly white. The web of her right thumb, tasked with slicing endless mountains of potatoes day after day, was covered in massive friction blisters that had repeatedly burst and formed painful, ugly scabs. Looking down at her, a sharp pang of absolute heartbreak pierced his chest. Prepping and cooking meals for 500 people solely using the raw labor of a married couple meant slaving away relentlessly from 4 a.m. until past midnight every single day. Even a human body made of solid iron would eventually shatter under that kind of abuse. Chen Xiangdong gently scooped his wife into his arms, laid her on the bed, and pulled up the blanket, before walking over to the window to ignite a cigarette. The more their street food empire exploded in popularity, the more that cafeteria cockroach Wang Dabiao would violently lose his absolute mind from jealousy. There was no telling what kind of vile underhanded schemes that snake would cook up next to sabotage them. Relying purely on a two-person operation was no longer a sustainable strategy. He absolutely needed to recruit a powerful crew and establish a highly efficient central kitchen in the rear. First thing, the following morning, Chen Xiangdong bypassed his usual routine at the wholesale food market, heading directly toward the sprawling residential alleyways located right behind the factory zone. This neighborhood was packed with tight-knit local residents, possessing incredibly spacious properties. After scouting the entire perimeter for a short while, his eyes locked onto a prime courtyard owned by Old Man Liu. The massive yard was nearly half the size of a standard basketball court, paved entirely with sturdy brick, and the far corner was conveniently equipped with both a manual pump well and an active tap water line. But the absolute game-changing feature was the massive heavy-duty rain canopy shielding the entire area, meaning howling winds or torrential downpours wouldn't stall their operation for a single second. Chen Xiangdong stepped inside and stated, "Uncle Liu, I'm looking to lease this entire courtyard from you. I'll compensate you with a solid 15 yuan every single month." Chen Xiangdong pulled out a stack of crisp bills and slammed them directly onto the stone table. The second Old Man Liu laid eyes on the cold, hard cash. He handed over the property keys without a single microsecond of hesitation, barking, "Deal. As long as you don't literally demolish the foundation of my house, you can run whatever operation you want here." Having successfully secured his new tactical headquarters, Chen Xiangdong marched straight into the residential compounds of the machinery factory. By around 10 o'clock a.m., out in the open communal square, a large group of middle-aged housewives and elderly women were perched on wooden stools trimming chives and stitching shoe soles. These individuals were all the dependents of low-income struggling factory laborers, who usually relied on tedious odd jobs like assembling matchboxes to scrape together a few miserable pennies, just to desperately supplement their household income. The moment Chen Xiangdong crossed the threshold of the courtyard, he projected his voice at the absolute top of his lungs, shouting, "Listen up, ladies. Does anyone here have some spare time on their hands today? I've got an incredibly lucrative business opportunity lined up. So who wants to make some serious cash?" The bustling crowd instantly went dead silent, before a plump older housewife dressed in a heavily patched smock curled her lip in utter disdain, sneering, well, look who it is if it isn't the infamous Chen Xiangdong." Word on the street is you officially ditched your factory gig to go hustle as a low-tier street vendor selling box lunches. What is that puny little food stand of yours actually expanding enough to hire people? Another elderly woman chimed in with a sharp mocking scoff. Exactly, he's just a sketchy private entrepreneur. What kind of job security could a hustle like that possibly offer? You're open for business today and bankrupt by tomorrow. We'd probably end up slaving away for nothing and not seeing a single dime. Chen Xiangdong didn't show even a single microscopic hint of irritation. Instead, he whipped out a thick stack of crisp 10 yuan bills, slapping them against his palm with a dramatic thunderous thud. Chen Xiangdong declared, I'm looking to recruit 5 sharp assistants to handle raw vegetable prep and cutting. The operation will be based right out of the courtyard houses behind the factory gates. The base salary is an ironclad guaranteed 30 yuan a month. The absolute second those words left his mouth, the entire communal square instantly exploded into absolute chaos. The heavyset housewife gasped in sheer disbelief. Wait, how much did you say? 30 yuan. The bundle of chives in her hands dropped straight into the dirt. As she stood up with wide trembling eyes stammering, Xiangdong, are you deliberately messing with your sister-in-law right now? A full-time registered factory employee barely makes 30-odd yuan a month after slaving away endlessly. And you're offering that same 30 yuan just to have someone wash some damn vegetables. Chen Xiangdong projected his voice with absolute authority, asserting, when I make a promise, it's permanently carved in stone. However, let me be entirely clear that 30 yuan is merely your basic starting pay. On top of that baseline, I am introducing a highly lucrative performance bonus system. The older women completely swarmed him eagerly, asking, what the hell is a performance bonus? All while their eyes remained hyperfixated, staring directly at the thick stack of cash glinting in Chen Xiangdong's hand. Chen Xiangdong hoisted a single finger into the air, explaining, a performance bonus means you get paid based on the exact volume of work you push out. Listen to me very carefully. Peeling a single massive basin of potatoes nets you an extra 2 cents. Washing a full industrial crate of Chinese cabbage earns you an additional 3 cents. And slicing a heavy basin of raw meat into shreds puts an extra 5 cents directly in your pocket. He pointed directly at the heavyset housewife and smirked. Sister Lee, everyone knows your hands move at absolute lightning speed. If Sister Lee manages to peel 10 basins of potatoes and wash 10 heavy crates of cabbage in a single afternoon shift, she will effortlessly secure an extra 50 cents in daily bonuses alone. By the time the month wraps up, that stacks up to an extra 15 yuan in pure profit. Combine that with your basic starting pay of 30 yuan, and Sister Lee will walk away with a staggering grand total of 45 yuan a month, which is significantly higher than the monthly salary your own husband brings home from the factory. Sister Lee quickly ran the financial calculations through her head, her entire face instantly flushing bright red from pure excitement. 45 cold hard yuan. Think about how many pounds of premium cornmeal that could buy, and how many massive slabs of juicy pork she could bring home to her family. Sister Lee bellowed, Xiangdong, sign me up right now. Your sister-in-law is 100% in. Sister Lee instantly hurled her work materials straight to the ground, pushing her way to the front while boasting about her incredible stamina, insisting that her knife skills were absolutely top tier, and begging Xiangdong to give her a shot. Another older woman hollered that she wanted in too, telling Xiangdong to look closely at her hands, guaranteeing she was the absolute cleanest vegetable washer in town. Yet another housewife screamed, stop shoving, stop shoving. I've got 3 starving kids at home waiting to be fed, so you absolutely have to give this job to me. The exact same women who were brutally trash-talking private businesses mere seconds ago were now completely losing their minds, frantically yanking at Chen Xiangdong's clothes to secure a spot on the roster. Chen Xiangdong braced his stance, thoroughly scanning the desperate crowd. He knew damn well that choosing the right staff wasn't just about raw muscle. It was heavily about flawless personal hygiene habits. He pointed directly at Sister Lee, and then handpicked 4 other women whose fingernails were meticulously trimmed, and whose modest clothes were washed so thoroughly they were faded white. He announced, tomorrow it'll be just you 5. Be ready to grind by 6 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning, and report directly to Old Man Liu's courtyard out back. At the crack of dawn the next morning, the 5 selected women stood sharply on standby inside the brick courtyard. Over a dozen massive stainless steel basins were laid out dead center in the yard, flanked by monolithic mountains of raw potatoes and heavy cabbages. Chen Xiangdong stepped forward, handing each worker a crisp white apron and a matching hair cap, ordering, put these on immediately, and make sure every single strand of hair is tucked securely inside that cap. I don't want to see a single loose hair visible. Chen Xiangdong maintained an absolute stone-cold expression, his voice dripping with immense authority. Sister Lee tied her apron, chuckling as she teased Xiangdong. We're just washing some basic greens yet, you're dressing us up like surgical doctors. Is all this extra drama really necessary? Chen Xiangdong bellowed. It is absolutely mandatory. He laid down the law, declaring, we are running a food operation that people put directly into their bodies, which means sanitary standards are our absolute highest priority. I'm laying out the harsh reality right now. if anyone dares to violate these strict protocols. Your entire base salary will be instantly forfeited, and you will be fired on the spot. Seeing his deadly serious demeanor, the 5 women instantly wiped the smirks off their faces and stood perfectly straight. Chen Xiangdong raised 3 fingers and barked, "Rule number 1. Before you touch a single ingredient, you must scrub your hands with heavy soap. And you will wash them a minimum of 3 full times. Rule number 2. Your fingernails must be clipped down raw to the skin line. With absolutely zero tolerance for dirt. Rule number 3. There will be zero casual chit-chat while working to ensure no saliva contaminates the food. And it is strictly forbidden to spit. If I ever catch so much as a single strand of hair contaminating the food, or find out that anyone has dropped produce off the floor and thrown it straight into the pot, don't expect me to show any mercy." The ironclad protocols were absolutely terrifying, but fueled by the promise of the 30 yuan base pay and the lucrative performance bonuses. All 5 women nodded their heads in unison. Chen Xiangdong stated firmly, "All right, scrub your hands and let's get to work." The absolute split second he gave the command, the 5 women rushed to the water taps, slathering on soap and scrubbing their hands with aggressive intensity. The moment they finished washing, they launched themselves at the massive mountains of produce. What happened in the very next scene left Song Seoyun completely flabbergasted when she arrived to deliver their breakfast. There was absolutely no need for a supervisor in the courtyard. The 5 women operated like highly efficient clockwork automatons, making their peeling blades and kitchen knives fly through the air like a blur. Sister Lee completely locked down one massive prep basin, declaring, "This entire pile of potatoes is mine, so don't any of you dare touch it." Well, her peeler made a fierce rhythmic scraping sound, stripping a potato every 3 seconds flat before throwing it with a loud splash into the water basin, driving the neighboring older woman into a state of panic. The woman shrieked, "Sister Lee has already cleared through 2 massive basins. Leave some work for the rest of us," as her own hands frantically scrubbed and washed the cabbages in her water tub, not even pausing to wipe the massive water splashes soaking her clothes. Sister Lee didn't even lift her head, firing back, "Why on earth should I leave any for you?" Xiangdong explicitly stated that more labor equals more cash. "My son's tuition fees for next semester are still completely up in the air, so I'm absolutely clearing 10 full basins today no matter what." Sister Lee's hands moved with even more blinding frantic speed. Over at the chopping stations, 2 other housewives pounded their knives against the cutting boards with a thunderous barrage, shredding the potatoes into incredibly fine uniform strips. The absolute moment they finished a basin, they would immediately grab a piece of chalk to run over to the wall, drawing a sharp tally mark directly under their own names. Every single one of those tally marks represented a cold hard 2 cents. To ensure they could score just one more tally mark on that wall, these fiercely driven women refused to take a single second even to drink water. And when they absolutely had to use the restroom, they did so at an all-out sprint. Song Seoyun stood frozen at the entrance, clutching the lunchboxes, completely mesmerized by the sheer intensity of the scene. The half crate of potatoes that had required her to slave away until midnight yesterday had been entirely demolished by these women in under 30 minutes flat, operating at this hyper-accelerated pace. Forget about feeding a mere 500 people. Even the heavy ingredients needed to feed 2,000 hungry people could be completely prepped and processed in a single morning. Song Seoyun swallowed hard, her mind totally blown, as she whispered, "This is absolutely insane speed." Chen Xiangdong took the lunchbox and shoveled a few quick mouthfuls of rice into his mouth, smirking as he replied, "This is the ultimate power of a piece rate bonus system. If you give them a fixed salary, they'll happily slack off and milk the clock until sundown. But the moment you directly link their hard cash to their physical output, you don't even need to crack a whip, they'll push themselves to the absolute limit." By the time the morning shift concluded, the massive mountain-like piles of raw vegetables had been completely processed. The flawlessly cleaned cabbages were thoroughly drained and stacked neatly in crates, while the perfectly sliced potato strings were submerged in clean water basins. The entire floor was swept spotlessly clean, and the massive heavy-duty chopping boards were scrubbed until they literally reflected light. Chen Xiangdong conducted a meticulous top-to-bottom inspection, nodding in absolute satisfaction upon finding 0 stray hairs in the greens, and absolutely not a single speck of dirt or grit remaining. Meanwhile, inside the second-floor executive conference room of Red Star Machinery Factory, the long corporate table was packed on both sides with high-ranking factory officials. Today was the official public bidding war for the contract of the primary cafeteria, and who would seize total control of the lucrative contract depended entirely on this single meal. Wang Dabiao sat on the left side of the room, flaunting his massive belly, with a heavy-set head chef standing guard right behind him. Laid out across the table before them were massive plates of braised pork knuckles, savory stir-fried beef cubes, and glossy sweet and sour pork tenderloin, each dish glistening with heavy shimmering oil, as the rich, intense aroma of meat forcefully penetrated the nostrils of everyone in the room. Chen Xiangdong sat calmly on the right side, with absolutely nothing but a single pitch-black clay pot resting before him. Wang Dabiao took one mocking glance at it, pointing directly at Chen Xiangdong before bursting into a loud, obnoxious laugh. Hey, Chen! Have you completely lost your mind from being dead broke? Everyone else showed up to a high-stakes corporate bidding war, and you brought a pathetic pot of plain boiled cabbage to insult the factory director. If you didn't have the cash to buy meat, you should have just spoken up. I could have easily loaned you a couple of yuan to buy a decent slab of pork. Chen Xiangdong completely ignored the arrogant clown, calmly reaching down to hoist the lid off his clay pot. The exact split second he did, a mind-blowing otherworldly aroma exploded into the room, instantly and completely overpowering the heavy stench of braised meat that previously filled the air. The exquisite broth inside the clay pot was as flawlessly crystal clear as plain boiled water, without a single visible droplet of floating grease or oily residue. Resting dead center in the clear liquid were a few tender pale yellow hearts of Chinese cabbage. Factory director Yang, who had just tasted the heavy braised pork knuckle and was feeling incredibly bloated, caught one whiff of this intoxicating fragrance and immediately ladled himself a full bowl. The moment the light savory broth washed down his throat, his eyes instantly widened into dinner plates from absolute shock, and he proceeded to chug 3 full bowls back to back, with beads of euphoric sweat instantly breaking out across his forehead. He slammed his bowl down, slapped his thigh aggressively, and barked, "This broth looks exactly like plain water. But the taste is literally 10 times richer than the most premium old hen stew. The cabbage is completely tender, meltingly soft, and packed with deep savory flavor. This is an absolute masterpiece, young Chen. What kind of legendary culinary technique is this?" Chen Xiangdong flashed a calm smile and replied, "Director, this is a classic delicacy known as steamed cabbage in supreme broth. It looks incredibly deceptively plain, but the labor required to brew it is absolutely immense. You have to simmer old hen's pork marrow bones and premium dried scallops for over half a day to aggressively extract every single drop of raw umami essence. The absolute secret weapon is using minced chicken breast pounded into a fine paste and tossing it into the boiling pot to absorb all the impurities. After repeating this precise filtration process 3 times, the soup finally filters down to become as crystal clear as pure water. Consuming heavy greasy meats wreaks total havoc on the stomach. So this is the ultimate palate cleanser to neutralize that grease." The other factory executives completely swarmed the table frantically, fighting over the soup. Everyone scrambled to grab a bowl for themselves, and within seconds the clay pot was scraped completely clean down to the very last cabbage leaf. Wang Dabiao stood there utterly flabbergasted, violently shoving his head chef's arm, and barking, "What the hell are you standing there paralyzed for? Hurry up and whip up a god-tier soup right now." The heavyset chef shook his head frantically, whispering in a trembling, anxious voice, "Boss Wang, mastering a broth of this caliber requires at least 10 years of intense professional training. This is legitimate culinary mastery. I simply don't possess that level of elite skill." Director Yang wiped his mouth, slapped the table authoritatively, and stood straight up, declaring, "All right, there's absolutely no need to continue this competition. The contract for the primary cafeteria is officially awarded to Chen Xiangdong. Young Chen, if you pour the exact same level of soul and dedication into our laborers' daily meals, as you did with this extraordinary broth, our factory's production rates will skyrocket to unprecedented heights." Every single high-ranking official raised their hands in unanimous agreement. Wang Dabiao's face flushed a violent, furious crimson. He shot a lethal death glare straight at Chen. Xiangdong brutally kicked his chair aside and slammed the door shut as he stormed out. At the crack of dawn the following morning, Chen Xiangdong marched into the primary cafeteria clutching his official contract. The absolute second he pushed open the kitchen doors, he was greeted by a scene of total unmitigated chaos. The heavy wooden chopping boards were encrusted with a thick, disgusting layer of oily sludge, while the floor was completely carpeted in rotten, slimy vegetable leaves. A crew of 4 or 5 veteran chefs were huddled around the table playing poker, dangling lit cigarettes carelessly from their lips, as the falling cigarette ash dropped directly into the massive flour bins nearby. Deep in the far corner of the room, a burly man with a savage, heavily scarred face was casually holding a slotted spoon, unapologetically skimming high-grade sesame oil from the facility's public drums, and funnily siphoning it straight into his own personal glass jar. This bloated scumbag went by the name of Liu Datu, a notoriously corrupt veteran slacker who practically ruled the cafeteria. He glanced sideways at Chen Xiangdong, his hand holding the funnel not freezing for even a fraction of a second, as he sneered sneeringly, "Oh, look at that. If it isn't our hotshot new independent contractor boss. Let's get one thing entirely straight. We're all officially registered factory employees here, meaning we hold permanent, unbreakable, state-backed iron rice bowls. You manage your little business operations over there, and we'll keep running things exactly the way we want over here. Mind your own damn business and don't cross our line." The other degenerates playing cards instantly chimed in to back up his arrogant display, jeering, "Exactly, some wet behind the ears punk thinks he can boss us around. Who the hell do you think you are, kitty?" Chen Xiangdong's expression went utterly pitch black as he marched directly over to them, slamming his palm onto the table with a thunderous impact that scattered their playing cards all over the floor. He violently snatched the stolen jar of sesame oil right out of Liu Datu's hands and smashed it viciously down onto the heavy wooden prep table, shattering the container into the million lethal glass shards that explode everywhere. As the aromatic oil spilled out in a messy, expanding puddle, Liu Datu completely lost his temper, aggressively rolling up his sleeves and stabbing a finger straight at Chen Xiangdong's face, roaring, "You've got a literal death wish, don't you, punk? How dare you destroy my property?" Chen Xiangdong stabbed his finger right back at the man's nose, his voice completely overpowering the room as he bellowed, "That is my sesame oil, you parasite! Siphoning state-owned inventory directly into your own pockets is straight-up criminal theft. I officially control this cafeteria now. The legal contract explicitly dictates that all personnel and staffing decisions are under my absolute authority. Now pack up your garbage and get the hell out of my kitchen right now." Liu Datu refused to back down, screaming at the top of his lungs, "You think you have the power to fire me? I am a permanent protected worker." Chen Xiangdong let out a venomous, bone-chilling smirk, pointing directly toward the exit as he barked, "Go ahead and ask Factory Director Yang himself whether I have the authority or not. If you utter one more syllable of backtalk, I will personally summon the Factory Security Division to arrest you on the spot for grand larceny and systemic asset theft, and ensure you spend the next few years rotting behind bars." The absolute second the security forces were mentioned, Liu Datu's face turned completely ghostly white, his arrogant tough guy demeanor instantly evaporating into thin air. He knew damn well that Chen Xiangdong was currently the untouchable golden boy of the director, and that crossing him would mean complete ruin, left with zero options. He ripped off his dirty apron and fled the kitchen with his head hung low in utter humiliation. The entire back kitchen dropped into a suffocating silence so intense you could hear a pin drop. The remaining veteran cooks were so thoroughly paralyzed with fear that their cigarettes slipped right out of their mouths, and they immediately stood at absolute rigid attention, not even daring to draw a single heavy breath. Chen Xiangdong shot a piercing razor-sharp glare across the room, pointing directly at the filthy grease-encrusted chopping boards, as he bellowed, "I don't give a damn about how much you slacked off in the past, but under my watch, your unbreakable iron rice bowl is officially shattered. If you want to keep your jobs, you will survive strictly by my protocols. First order of business, this place must be completely immaculate. For every single speck of grease or grime left on a cutting board, I'm docking your pay by 1 yuan. Seeing the terror-stricken cooks instinctively shrink back in fear, Chen Xiangdong slightly dialed back his intense tone, adding, "However, if you hustle hard under my command, and are genuinely willing to put in the real sweat equity, I promise you will be swimming in cold hard cash. From this moment on, the cafeteria completely abolishes fixed salaries. Your baseline pay will still hit your accounts, but it will now be paired with a lucrative volume bonus tied directly to dish sales." He marched straight over to the meal-serving windows, slapping his hand against the counter as he declared, "Every single station will house a public feedback ledger. If the factory laborers love the food and leave glowing reviews, the specific chef behind that recipe secures an immediate 20-cent bonus per dish. And come month's end, the top-rated culinary mastermind will receive a cash bonus straight out of my personal pocket. A whopping 50 yuan in pure reward money." The absolute second the mention of massive extra cash hit their ears, especially a monumental 50 yuan fortune, the veteran cook's eyes completely lit up with intense greed. They exchanged quick, energized glances with one another, instantly pivoting to grab cleaning rags and aggressively scrubbing the filth off the prep tables. Ever since Chen Xiangdong took full executive control of the primary cafeteria, daytime sales absolutely skyrocketed to unprecedented levels, with massive queues of hungry factory laborers stretching out for dozens of meters. However, later that evening, while Chen Xiangdong stayed late in the office auditing the financial ledgers, he stumbled upon a massive gaping market problem. The steel mill operated with thousands of heavy laborers working in continuous 24-hour rotating shifts, meaning by 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, the graveyard shift workers were still slaving away with their stomachs growling fiercely from hunger. Right around midnight, workshop director Old Li rushed into the facility hunting for hot water, bumping straight into Chen Xiangdong and immediately pouring his heart out, venting, "Xiangdong, my brother, let me paint the picture for you. The daytime service at your cafeteria is absolutely phenomenal, but our late-night graveyard shift crew is catching absolute hell. Swinging heavy sledgehammers in the dead of night burns an astronomical amount of physical energy. Yet there isn't a single food stall open to sell a hot meal at this hour. Our guys are forced to choke down rock-solid, ice-cold mantou buns washed down with freezing tap water, which leaves everyone suffering from severe acid reflux, and completely drained of the strength needed to hit production quotas." The exact split-second Chen Xiangdong heard this, a brilliant light bulb instantly went off in his brain. A massive, highly lucrative goldmine of a business opportunity had just presented itself. Thousands of graveyard shift workers with cash burning holes in their pockets were missing absolutely nothing but a fresh, piping hot meal. As long as he could whip up some rich, savory nighttime grub, that was deeply filling and affordable. The cash would flow effortlessly straight into his pockets like a non-stop waterfall. No hesitation, just pure execution. Chen Xiangdong immediately decided to launch a late-night street food stall. However, shutting down and restarting the cafeteria's massive industrial stoves at night was a complete waste of expensive coal, and setting up a stall in the open lot outside using standard briquette stoves meant dealing with a pathetic weak flame. Late-night street food was all about standard fried noodles and fried rice, which relied heavily on a raging hyper-intense flame to lock in that signature smoky flavor. If the fire wasn't fiercely hot enough, the end result would just be a soggy, unappetizing pile of mushy dough. But a minor technical hitch like this was never going to stop Chen Xiangdong. At the absolute crack of dawn the following morning, he hopped onto his tricycle and pedaled straight toward the local scrapyard. Dropping a mere 2 yuan, he hauled back several battered, discarded oil drums, along with a hefty pile of thick sheet metal. Borrowing a heavy hammer and a pair of industrial iron shears, Chen Xiangdong spent the entire afternoon in the backyard creating a thunderous clanging racket. He smashed out the bottoms of the oil drums, welded robust iron bars onto the frame, and managed to build a totally bizarre contraption. Song Shuyun walked over carrying a glass of refreshing herbal tea, looking completely bewildered as she asked, "Xiangdong, what on earth are you doing with this junk? Are you trying to become a blacksmith or something?" Chen Xiangdong wiped a thick layer of sweat from his brow, pointing proudly at the custom rig on the ground as he replied, "Xuyun, this beauty right here is a high-efficiency, energy-concentrating windproof blast furnace. The wind gets brutally harsh out here at night, which causes standard stove flames to flicker and scatter. So I custom attached a heavy-duty mechanical bellows to the base of this drum, and forged a wraparound sheet metal windshield right over the top. The exact moment you start pumping those bellows, the entire volcanic heat signature is forcefully trapped right at the bottom of the wok, unleashing a thermal blast that is significantly more powerful than any commercial kitchen stove." By 10 o'clock that very night, Chen Xiangdong hauled his custom blast furnace out onto the concrete clearing by the back exit. He fired up the coal and instructed a heavy-set kitchen assistant Auntie Peng to pump the bellows. With a violent whooshing rush of forced air, a towering column of roaring flames shot half a meter into the night sky through the windshield. Lethal ribbons of blue and crimson fire aggressively licked the underbelly of the wok, sending an intense scorching heat wave blasting straight into their faces. Auntie Peng recoiled in absolute terror, gasping, "Oh my goodness. This fire is absolutely terrifying, sick." But this extreme volcanic heat was precisely the effect Chen Xiangdong was aiming for. He securely mounted a massive industrial iron wok over the flames, pivoting toward the back kitchen to roar, "Get the prep ingredients ready, tonight we aren't doing anything fancy. It's time to unleash pure, unadulterated, high-heat street food stir-fry. Our heavy hitters tonight will be lard-infused, shredded pork fried noodles, classic golden egg fried rice, and fiercely flash-fried pork offal. Those working the graveyard shift are doing brutal manual labor. So we must deliver maximum grease, heavy salt, and absolute satiety." A massive basin of snow-white pork lard was melted down to perfection, while mounds of shredded pork and raw offal were laid out across the prep station, just waiting for the midnight whistle to blow. By 2 a.m., inside the steel smelting workshop, the laborers were hitting their absolute peak of exhaustion and hunger. A rookie worker, young Zhang, had just stepped down from the blistering blast furnace. So famished, his head was spinning and his vision was blurry. Just as he was about to reluctantly choke down a rock-hard frozen mantou bun, an incredibly aggressive mouth-watering aroma carried over on the night breeze and forcefully penetrated the workshop. The rich, intoxicating scent of scallion oil coupled with the deep charred fragrance of flash-fried soy sauce invaded everyone's nostrils with absolute authority. Young Zhang took 2 violent sniffs as his stomach instantly let out a thunderous growl, making him gasp, "What on earth is that heavenly smell? Who the hell is stir-frying meat in the absolute dead of night?" A veteran laborer standing nearby muttered, "It seems to be wafting over directly from the back entrance of the primary cafeteria." Suddenly, nobody could sit still anymore. Several workers instantly tossed their pathetic dry rations aside, pivoted on their heels, and sprinted full throttle toward the source of the aroma. The exact split second they arrived at the back door, the entire crowd stood completely frozen in absolute awe. The concrete clearing was illuminated by 2 massive hanging light bulbs, flooding the entire area with a brilliant, blinding light. Chen Xiangdong was stripped down to his bare chest, with a heavy sweat towel draped carelessly around his neck, standing like an absolute boss right before his custom blast furnace, amidst the towering sky-high volcanic flames. He scooped up a massive ladle of rich pork lard and hurled it into the glowing red iron wok. A violent thunderous sizzle erupted alongside a thick cloud of white smoke, and a barrage of minced scallions, ginger, and garlic immediately followed into the pan. The overwhelming fragrance exploded across the courtyard in a massive shockwave. Young Zhang lunged forward against the serving counter, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Chef, give me a massive double order of fried noodles. I am literally about to starve to death out here." Chen Xiangdong let out a booming laugh, shouting back, "You got it." One god-tier lard and shredded pork stir-fried noodle dish coming right up. Chen Xiangdong grabbed a heavy fistful of pork strips and slid them into the scorching wok, immediately throwing the thick noodles right over them. With a sudden, violent snap of his powerful wrist, the massive, incredibly heavy iron wok became in his hands, as deceptively light and effortless as a mere toy. The noodles somersaulted gracefully through the air, as premium dark soy sauce was drizzled aggressively along the blistering rim of the wok, causing the roaring flames to instantly breach the pan and engulf the food in a spectacular display of fire, whipping up a mesmerizing aura of pure flame. This was the legendary elite wok-tossing mastery of a true national banquet chef. Every single strand of noodle was evenly and perfectly coated in rich, glossy oil, with each savory strand glistening separately, completely defined and drenched in sauce. It relied entirely on this fierce, ultra-high heat flash fry to lock the flavor in permanently, in less than 2 minutes flat. A plate of piping hot steaming and brilliantly glossy reddish-brown fried noodles was slammed down onto the counter. Young Jong frantically snatched up his chopsticks, completely disregarding the blistering heat that burned his lips, and began inhaling the noodles into his mouth at a ferocious slurping pace, with just one monumental bite. The rich, decadent aroma of the pork lard, the velvety tenderness of the shredded pork, and the perfect springy bite of the noodles completely exploded inside his mouth. Young Jong slapped his thigh in sheer unadulterated ecstasy, roaring, "Oh my god. This is absolutely mind-blowingly delicious." Young Jong declared that he had never tasted fried noodles this insanely flavorful in his entire life, exclaiming, "After devouring this, I feel like I can march right back into the workshop and swing that heavy sledgehammer another 100 times. The legendary news instantly spread across the entire factory compound like wildfire. Within less than half an hour, the graveyard shift workers had completely swarmed the area, packing the late-night street food stall to absolute maximum capacity. Someone bellowed, "Give me a massive order of golden fried rice," and load it up with an extra egg. Chen Xiangdong let out a booming laugh, his heavy iron wok flying and flipping as the vibrant golden egg liquid perfectly coated each grain of rice, making them literally dance across the pan. The mesmerizing sight made the hungry onlookers fiercely swallow their saliva. Another worker screamed, "Give me a plate of flash-fried pork offal," and loaded up with extra hot chili peppers. The heavy iron spatulas clanged rhythmically against the woks amidst the roaring furnace flames, and the thunderous chorus of ravenous workers devouring their food completely transformed the dead-of-night factory grounds into a spectacularly lively festival. Even more insane was the fact that the aroma of this high-heat flash fry was so aggressively dominant. It drifted straight past the borders of the entire facility. Right on the other side of the brick wall sat the adjacent machinery plant, which also operated on a continuous 3-shift rotation. Old Zhao from the security division was currently patrolling the perimeter, flashing his flashlight around. Suddenly, Old Zhao caught a faint rustling sound, emanating from the far side of the brick boundary wall. Old Zhao barked loudly, "Who's there? What the hell do you think you're doing?" Sick. He aggressively whipped his flashlight beam toward the spot, only to spot 2 or 3 dark shadows precariously scaling the top of the wall. Those individuals were sticking their rear ends in the air, preparing to leap straight down from the high wall. Old Zhao let out a thunderous roar, "Catch the thieves," as he sprinted forward full throttle, brutally pinning the lead runner face first into the dirt with an iron grip. The pinned individual instantly shielded his head, screaming desperately for mercy. "Ow, ow, ow. Stop hitting me. Please stop hitting me. Officer Zhao, chill out. It's literally me, Young Wang, from the second workshop." Young Wang begged desperately for mercy. Old Zhao took one look at his face and was completely losing his mind with rage, demanding, "You little punk, what the hell are you scaling the perimeter wall for in the dead of night? Are you trying to steal state-owned property?" Young Wang pointed frantically over to the other side of the high wall, fiercely swallowing his saliva as he gasped, "No way, man." Brother Zhao, just take a deep breath and smell this insane aroma. Young Wang explained, "The steel mill right next door just launched a legendary late-night street food stall. The fragrance of that flash fry is so ridiculously potent, it's making everyone's brain go completely numb." Young Wang added that their crew was so brutally starved they simply couldn't handle it anymore, so they decided to hop the fence just to buy a hot meal to survive. Old Zhao froze his hand, took a deep sniff through his nose, and realized, damn, he wasn't lying. A wave of incredibly decadent savory meat aroma forcefully penetrated his nostrils, instantly triggering a thunderous growl right from the depths of his own stomach. Old Zhao aggressively swallowed a mouthful of saliva, released his vice-like grip, let out 2 dry coughs, and muttered, "Scaling the factory walls is a severe disciplinary violation, you know that, right? Consider this your absolute one-time warning. Hurry up and secure the food already. And while you're at it, bring back an extra order of minced pork fried rice for me. Make sure it's an absolute king-size portion. And tell them to load it up with extra meat." Within less than 2 days, the sheer volume of outside factory workers scaling the walls to raid the night food stall skyrocketed, to the point where a whole layer of bricks on the wall top was completely worn down by footsteps. Eventually, The laborers from both the machinery plant and the textile mill found climbing the high wall way too tedious. So they straight up pulled their cash together and sent designated runners hauling massive industrial metal buckets to conduct black market style food transactions right over the wall top every single midnight, collecting mass orders of hot meals to haul back and distribute to the hungry crews. The primary cafeteria's late night food stall had officially become an absolute viral sensation, operating non-stop from 10 p.m. every night until 4 a.m. the following morning. Chen Xiangdong's massive iron wok never got a single second to cool down. He immediately promoted two sharp, quick-witted apprentices exclusively to handle the heavy chopping and prep work, while he personally deadlocked his focus on managing the volcanic fire and executing the stir-fries. As they finally closed up the stall at dawn, Chen Xiangdong and Song Xiuyun sat together in the back kitchen auditing the night's financial revenue. The pile of loose bills and coins stacked upon the table looked like a literal miniature mountain. Song Xiuyun's fingers were shaking uncontrollably as she counted the massive stash of cash, and her eyes welled up with tears of sheer disbelief. The net profit generated from this single night of operations alone was literally enough to match what an average blue-collar worker earned in a grueling half-year of hard labor. Song Xiuyun looked up at her husband, her eyes gleaming with pride as she whispered, "Xiangdong, our financial cash flow from just this one single night is significantly more than what we used to pull in from selling lunchboxes for 3 whole days combined." Song Xiuyun stared up intensely at her man in absolute awe. Chen Xiangdong chugged a massive gulp of refreshing cold water, wiped his mouth and smiled warmly, saying, "Those graveyard shift laborers work themselves to the bone. We're simply trading our elite culinary craftsmanship for their hard-earned money. This is honest wealth and it feels damn good to earn it. From this moment on, this late-night food stall is going to be our absolute personal goldmine." Chen Xiangdong's total revenue instantly skyrocketed by a staggering 300%. But as the calendar flipped into the scorching month of June, the weather turned into a literal suffocating inferno. Inside the back kitchen, with several massive iron woks roaring non-stop, the entire room became as punishingly hot as a giant bamboo steamer. The kitchen assistants were forced to strip down to their bare chests just to survive the shift, with thick beads of sweat pouring down their bodies like rain. Song Xiuyun walked over carrying a large basin filled with shredded pork, her eyebrows locked into a deep, anxious frown. She called out in deep distress, "Xiangdong, come take a look at this quick. This meat was delivered just this morning, but after sitting out for a few hours, it's already turning slimy and releasing a distinctly sour-spoiled odor." Chen Xiangdong leaned in close to catch a whiff, and a foul, gamey stench of decomposition immediately hit his nostrils. Without uttering a single word of complaint, he lifted the heavy metal basin, marched out to the backyard waste bin, and aggressively dumped the entire batch of meat right into the trash. Song Xiuyun slapped her thigh in utter sheer panic, crying out, "Oh my goodness, why on earth did you just throw all of that away? We could have washed it thoroughly and masked it with heavy spices to make it passable. That is pure hard cash you just tossed out." Chen Xiangdong's face instantly hardened into a stern expression as he replied, "Xiuyun, if someone gets severe food poisoning in this blistering heat, who is going to take the blame? The legendary reputation we worked so hard to build cannot be destroyed over a single batch of bad meat. If it's spoiled, not a single bite goes to our customers." An apprentice wiped the sweat from his brow and muttered under his breath, "The weather is only getting hotter. We can't just keep throwing away precious inventory every single day, can we?" Chen Xiangdong thoroughly washed his hands and declared, "Since the climate wants to play dirty, then we will simply engineer our own localized cooling zone." Chen Xiangdong gathered a few burly muscular kitchen hands to completely clear out the cluttered storage room in the backyard, intending to build a makeshift primitive cold storage unit. The entire crew was completely baffled by the plan. Industrial cold storage required massive, expensive machinery. So how could a rundown cafeteria kitchen possibly pull it off? Chen Xiangdong immediately started delegating tasks, taking several discarded old iron pipes and drilling a neat row of microscopic holes into them before mounting them directly above the door frames and windows. He commanded, "Find me a few of the thickest, heaviest burlap sacks we have. Wash them thoroughly and hang them directly beneath the iron pipes." Once the burlap sacks were securely hung, the iron pipes were hooked up to a main water valve. The moment the water was turned on, it began to drip steadily through the tiny drilled holes, completely saturating the heavy burlap sacks until they were dripping wet. Chen Xiangdong gestured toward the kitchen exit and barked, "Go! Bring out the absolute largest industrial exhaust fan from the back kitchen and position it to blast air directly through those wet burlap sacks." The instant the massive fan was switched on, and a powerful roaring draft surged directly through the room. The moisture-laden burlap instantly triggered a massive evaporative cooling effect, and within a mere handful of minutes, the temperature inside the storage room began plummeting drastically. Song Xiuyun stepped inside, her eyes lighting up with absolute astonishment, as she gasped, "Oh my goodness, how is it so incredibly frosty and refreshing in here? It feels like an entirely different season compared to the scorching heat outside." The kitchen helpers, who had just squeezed inside with her, were so utterly dumbfounded that their jaws practically slammed onto the concrete floor. One of them looked at him in total awe and asked, "Chef Chen, what kind of sorcery did you just pull off? How can hanging a few tattered burlap sacks generate this much freezing air?" Chen Xiangdong casually brushed the residual dust off his hands and smiled, saying, "It's simple science water evaporation. The rapid airflow aggressively siphons the ambient heat right out of the room, creating an instant natural chill. From now on, all high-grade ingredients and fresh meats will be stored strictly right here." But merely achieving an icy climate above ground wasn't enough to satisfy Chen Xiangdong. He immediately spearheaded another operation, leading his crew to excavate a massive 2-meter deep subterranean cellar right in the corner. He reinforced the surrounding walls with red bricks and lined them with heavy wooden planks, creating the perfect bunker to store bulk items like potatoes and cabbages. With their supply chain preservation issues flawlessly resolved, Chen Xiangdong locked his sights directly onto the sourcing of his inventory. The sketchy middleman suppliers who usually delivered their produce never rolled up with their handcarts until the absolute dead of noon, leaving the vegetables completely withered by the sun, and the fresh meat radiating an unappetizing tepid warmth. Not to mention their delivery waits were frequently shortchanged. At the absolute crack of dawn the very next morning, Chen Xiangdong pedaled his tricycle full throttle straight toward the rural outskirts of town, banging loudly on the front door of Old Man Lee, a legendary local agricultural mogul. Old Man Lee was puffing lazily on his traditional pipe when Chen Xiangdong cut straight to the chase, declaring, "Uncle Lee, every single vegetable harvested from your fields and every pig slaughtered by your relatives. I am buying out your entire inventory." Old Man Lee's hand trembled violently as he stammered in shock, "A total buyout. Are you pulling my leg, young man?" Chen Xiangdong confidently pulled up a wooden stool, sat down, and stated, "I am the exclusive independent contractor for the primary factory cafeteria. We burn through hundreds of pounds of fresh produce on a daily basis, so we can easily exhaust your supply. I will pay full market price, not a single penny less, and settle the entire balance in cold hard cash right on the spot." Chen Xiangdong leaned in and added, "However, I have one non-negotiable condition. I absolutely do not want any produce harvested under the midday sun. Every single morning at 3 a.m. sharp, the vegetables must arrive still drenched in morning dew, freshly picked, and the meat must be dispatched immediately after a midnight slaughter, delivered straight to the cafeteria's back kitchen. Can you pull that off?" Old Man Lee slapped his thigh in sheer excitement and roared, "Hell yes we can. The midnight air keeps the produce phenomenally crisp and bursting with life. By cutting out those greedy middleman distributors, I'll be raking in way more profit, so throwing in a bit of midnight elbow grease is absolutely nothing." The two of them high-fived and finalized the deal right on the spot. From that pivotal moment, the primary cafeteria's entire ingredient supply chain underwent a massive overhaul, with shipments arriving directly at the crack of midnight. The vegetable leaves were brilliantly emerald, so crisp they practically burst with just moisture when squeezed, while the premium pork remained flawlessly ruby red, firm, and structurally perfect. Whisked away immediately upon arrival into the custom cooling station and subterranean cellar, as July rolled in, the peak midsummer heat wave unleashed its full tyrannical fury, leaving everyone utterly irritated and drenched in sweat. The chaotic street food vendors outside had absolutely no proper cold storage to preserve their produce, meaning their raw meat would spoil and emit a foul stench after sitting out for just half a day. Desperate for profit, the vendors dumped heavy spices into the pan to mask the sour rotting meat and sold it anyway. The absolute second the midday factory whistle rang out, several miserable workers were already clutching their stomachs, desperately sprinting full throttle toward the restrooms. The furious laborers cursed, "Those scumbag street vendors outside have absolute charcoal black hearts. The meat is literally rotting and rancid, yet they still have the absolute audacity to sell it." Other workers chimed in shouting, "The secondary factory cafeteria isn't a single bit better either. Their entire batch of stir-fried pork with green peppers is completely sour and spoiled." Old Lee got so blindingly enraged, he violently flipped his plate straight into the kitchen window. Under this brutal summer heat wave, the intimidated workers simply didn't dare to eat just anywhere anymore. A few of them yelled, "Let's move out. Let's head over to the primary cafeteria. Chef Chen's culinary craftsmanship is legendary and safe." A massive group of laborers marched in unison toward the primary cafeteria grounds, the exact split second they crossed the threshold. A blast of refreshing icy wind laced with the decadent aroma of gourmet food slammed straight into their faces. Stepping inside, they witnessed a monumental winding queue already snaking out from the serving windows. A spectacular row of massive industrial iron basins was lined up neatly across the counter, but the absolute centerpiece was a colossal frosted barrel of ice-cold mung bean soup. The exterior walls of the barrel were heavily beaded with condensation radiating a visibly freezing aura. Right beside it sat a vibrant emerald green smashed cucumber salad that looked incredibly crisp. A platter of braised eggplant with savory minced pork that was brilliantly glossy and aromatic. And a marinated pig ear salad so translucent and clean it didn't possess a single trace of off flavors. Old Zhao aggressively swallowed a mouthful of saliva, slid his metal lunchbox forward, and barked, "Chef Chen, give me a double helping of that marinated pig ear salad. A side of the smashed cucumbers, and ladle out 2 massive scoops of that ice-cold mung bean soup." Chen Xiangdong's hands moved with lightning speed, serving up the glorious feast in seconds flat. Old Zhao secured an empty seat, sat down, and aggressively shoved a hefty chunk of pig ear straight into his mouth. The crunchy cartilage let out a satisfying loud snap between his teeth, while the collagen-rich skin was velvety tender, perfectly infused with a robust garlic fragrance. He immediately followed it with a massive, desperate gulp of the ice-cold mung bean soup. The freezing liquid cascaded down into his stomach, instantly annihilating the suffocating summer heat from his entire body. Old Zhao slapped his thigh with dynamic force and roared at the top of his lungs, "This is absolute witchcraft. In this blistering heat, every other food stall's dishes have gone completely sour and rancid. So how on earth is Chef Chen's food still this mind-blowingly fresh? Eating this is pure unadulterated bliss?" The surrounding workers nodded in passionate agreement, aggressively inhaling their meals at a frantic pace, screaming in unison that this was the absolute ultimate dining experience. The workers all cheered that only the primary cafeteria was truly reliable. With vegetables so phenomenally crisp, they looked freshly harvested. The grateful laborers declared, "From now on, through this brutal summer heat, we are exclusively sticking with Chef Chen, Song Xuyun watched the workers devouring their meals with such absolute ecstasy, her face lighting up with a massive beaming smile from ear to ear. Later that night, as they closed down the stall to audit the day's earnings, Song Xuyun's fingers trembled with pure excitement as she counted the bills, whispering, "Xiangdong, our cash flow from this afternoon's lunch rush alone beat yesterday's by a whopping 30 yuan. The other cafeterias are completely abandoned deserts. Literally every single worker in the facility is swarming our place." Chen Xiangdong casually wiped a thick layer of sweat from his brow, chugged down a giant gulp of refreshing boiled water, and let out a confident, knowing smile. The primary cafeteria's operations grew more phenomenally explosive day by day, with the massive winding lunch queues regularly stretching all the way out onto the main road. As they wrapped up the night shift, Song Xuyun aggressively scrubbed down the tables while looking deeply anxious, sighing, "Xiangdong, our business is undeniably booming, but I honestly can't shake this lingering uneasy feeling in my chest. We completely ousted Wang Dabiao and stripped him of his lucrative independent catering contract, ruining his absolute cash cow. That man is a notorious arrogant tyrant who is used to bullying everyone in this factory. Do you honestly think he'll just sit back and swallow this humiliating defeat? I'm terrified he's lurking in the shadows, waiting to violently stab us in the back." Chen Xiangdong slammed the massive iron wok upside down onto the brick stovetop, snatched up a heavy towel to wipe his hands, and let out a cold, ruthless sneer, stating whether he can swallow it or not, he has no choice. "My beautiful wife, lock your worries away and put your heart completely at ease. If that scumbag Wang Dabiao has the audacity to launch a direct overt attack against us, I will personally break his face right then and there, but if he tries to play dirty in the dark, I will make absolutely sure he suffers catastrophic consequences he can never survive. Over the past 2 days, I have already meticulously laid out the ultimate trap. Now I'm just waiting for that brainless idiot to blindly leap straight into it." Song Xuyun listened to his words, left completely and utterly mystified. Chen Xiangdong gently urged her to wash up and get some much-needed sleep. In reality, Chen Xiangdong had long since anticipated a desperate low-life retaliation from a thug like Wang Dabiao. Earlier that afternoon, he had pulled a battle-hardened military veteran named Daju to one side, covertly slipping him 2 premium packs of Dekiamen cigarettes. The two of them then snuck deep into the grain storage warehouse, rigging a clever high-stakes tactical tripwire mechanism right behind the massive iron door. They tightly strung several strands of ultra-thin, completely invisible monofilament fishing line, anchoring one end securely to the heavy door hinge, while linking the opposite end to over a dozen discarded heavy industrial tin cans. Each and every can was packed to the brim with sharp, jagged iron nails and broken glass shards, suspended high in the air by a taut rope directly over the upper door frame. The absolute instant anyone from the outside tried to push the door open even a fraction of an inch, this massive barrage of heavy tin cans would violently crash straight down onto the floor, unleashing a deafening, thunderous racket that would wake up half the entire factory compound. Furthermore, Daju had secretly recruited 2 of his burly, muscular military buddies to forego going home for the night, sleeping directly in the cluttered storage room adjacent to the custom cold unit. The trio lay down fully clothed and ready for combat, tightly gripping heavy flashlights and thick wooden clubs, while straining their ears to capture the slightest vibration from the dark courtyard outside. By 2:30 a.m. in the dead of night, the machinery plant was completely pitch black and shrouded in darkness, so eerily silent that the only sound left was the buzzing of nocturnal insects. Suddenly, Wang Dabiao, clad in a stealthy black cloth jacket, crept along, hugging the base of the wall as he covertly sneaked toward the primary cafeteria's backyard. Clutched tightly in his hand was a ragged, filthy chemical fertilizer sack, the opening of which was actively leaking a nauseating foul stench of decay. The sack was packed to the brim with over a dozen dead rotting rats, all procured by bribing the neighborhood street kids to hunt them down. Having baked under the scorching sun for 2 whole days, the carcasses were already crawling with live maggots. In addition to these repulsive dead rodents, he carried 3 heavy glass bottles, filled with pitch-black putrid sludge siphoned straight from the depths of a stagnant sewer ditch. Wang Dabiao ground his back molars together in blinding rage, gazing intensely at the massive iron door of the grain warehouse, and viciously spat a thick glob of phlegm onto the concrete floor. Wang Dabiao snarled under his breath, "Chen Xiangdong, you absolute son of a bitch. You actually had the audacity to rob me of my lucrative cash cow. Tonight, this vengeful father of yours is going to take this pile of rotting, disgusting vermin and bury them straight into your premium sacks of rice and flour. Then I'll drench your crisp vegetable leaves in this toxic sewer sludge. The exact second a few workers collapse from food poisoning tomorrow morning, your precious primary cafeteria will be permanently shut down by the authorities. When that catastrophic day comes, I'll see if you can still act like a smug, arrogant boss." The more he visualized the sabotage, the more intoxicatingly smug he became, his brain completely filled with twisted fantasies of Chen Xiangdong handcuffed in prison, and Song Xiuyun weeping on her knees, desperately begging him for mercy. He stealthily crept up right in front of the massive iron door, and after confirming that the surrounding courtyard was completely deserted, he pulled out a precisely bent piece of heavy iron wire and slid it smoothly into the keyhole to pick the lock. He knew the inner mechanics of this ancient brass padlock entirely inside and out, after tampering and twisting it for barely 30 seconds. A sharp, distinct click echoed out and the heavy lock popped open. A sinister, twisted grin split across Wang Dabiao's face as he aggressively ripped the padlock free and gently pushed open the massive iron door. The rusty door hinge let out a faint low creak as he confidently lifted his foot to stride right into the warehouse. But the exact millisecond his foot crossed the threshold, his ankle violently caught against an ultrafine invisible tripwire. Before his brain could even register what was happening, a catastrophic barrage of thunderous noise crashed straight down upon his head like a physical hammer. Clang, crash, shatter, boom, boom, boom. Over a dozen industrial tin cans packed to the brim with jagged iron nails and jagged shards of broken glass came raining down like a localized hailstorm, viciously pelting the heavy iron doors and the solid concrete ground below. Nails and glass exploded outward in a chaotic blast, and the catastrophic screech of metal clashing echoed through the night louder than a dynamite explosion. Wang Dabiao's entire body shuddered violently in sheer unadulterated terror, his scalp going completely numb with horror, as his hands trembled so uncontrollably that the vile fertilizer sack slipped straight from his grip. Wang Dabiao let out a frantic, panicked shriek, "Holy Mother of God, what the hell?" before spinning around in a desperate bid to escape. But right at that exact second, a thunderous roar erupted from the adjacent storage room. "Freeze right there. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Immediately following the barked command, a deafening crash echoed, as the wooden door was violently splintered into pieces by a savage kick. 3 blinding high-powered flashlight beams pierced through the darkness, locking directly onto Wang Dabiao's face. The piercing glare completely blinded him, forcing him to shield his eyes as his legs went utterly weak. Daju bellowed with ferocious authority, "Don't you dare move. Take one more step and I'll snap your legs in half," before aggressively lunging forward. Daju was a highly trained elite military scout veteran with lightning-fast combat reflexes. He closed the distance in a single explosive stride, brutally snatching Wang Dabiao's meaty arm and violently wrenching it behind his back, while simultaneously driving a heavy boot straight into the back of his knee joint. With a dull, heavy thud, the massive 200-pound frame of Wang Dabiao slammed forcefully onto the rigid concrete ground, completely crushing his knees and instantly ripping his trousers wide open. The agonizing pain caused tears and mucus to stream uncontrollably down his face, his entire expression twisting into a hideous mask of pure torment, as he screeched at the absolute top of his lungs, Pain, it's burning, it's breaking, it's breaking. Big brother, please take it easy on me." Suddenly, a rhythmic set of calm footsteps echoed through the courtyard. Chen Xiangdong strolled out with the jacket casually draped over his shoulders, a cigarette dangling loosely from his lips, as he casually swept his flashlight beam across the floor, stepping right up to the groveling Wang Dabiao. The harsh beam illuminated the ripped chemical fertilizer sack, the opening of which had completely torn apart, revealing several bloated, maggot-infested dead rats that had spilled out onto the floor, right next to the shattered glass bottles leaking pitch-black toxic sewer sludge. The suffocating stench of rotting flesh blasted straight into their nostrils, triggering an instant wave of intense gag-inducing nausea. Chen Xiangdong locked his eyes onto the repulsive evidence on the ground, letting out a chilling, deeply mocking sneer as he muttered, well, Wang Dabiao, sneaking into my grain storage in the absolute dead of night just to bear gifts. I must say your taste is incredibly unique, and this presents quite the fragrant aroma, doesn't it? Wang Dabiao, pinned face first against the concrete, finally realized his captor was Chen Xiangdong, and his heart instantly dropped into his stomach as he realized he was completely finished. Yet he still desperately strained his vocal cords to deliver a pathetic lie, screaming, "Chen Xiangdong, don't you dare spew your absolute lies here. I was literally just walking past this place. This disgusting sack doesn't even belong to me. I have absolutely no idea which complete bastard left it sitting here, and I just happened to accidentally trip over it." Chen Xiangdong took a menacing step forward and violently stomped his foot directly onto the fertilizer sack, his eyes transforming into razor-sharp icy daggers. Chen Xiangdong sneered, "Just walking past, huh? You somehow managed to walk past right into the interior threshold of my locked grain storage. And your version of walking past involves clutching a lock-picking wire tightly in your hand." Chen Xiangdong aggressively flicked his flashlight beam downward, illuminating Wang Dabiao with blinding accuracy, right as he desperately tried and failed to discard the incriminating metal wire. Wang Dabiao's face completely drained of color, turning ghost white, his lips trembling violently with absolute panic, as he spent a small eternity utterly choked up, unable to squeeze out a single syllable. Chen Xiangdong muttered, "Every single one of your pathetic low-life criminal tactics was already meticulously calculated and anticipated by me days ago." He then squatted down patronizingly, slapping Wang Dabiao's bloated, sweaty face with his palm. Continuing, "The exact moment you stripped yourself of the cafeteria catering contract, I knew your fragile ego would never be able to accept the defeat. A useless, incompetent coward like you doesn't possess any actual real-world skills, so you naturally resort to these pathetic, underhanded, and completely toxic sabotage methods. This entire setup was a beautiful masterclass in baiting a rat directly into his own execution chamber. Do you finally comprehend?" Behind him, Daju ruthlessly applied massive upward pressure to the armlock, sending an agonizing shockwave through Wang Dabiao that made him screech like a slaughtered pig. "Boss Chen, Grandfather Chen, I was completely wrong. I'm begging for your mercy. I suffered a temporary moment of absolute insanity. Please, just give me a single pass. Let me off the hook. I swear on my life, I will never ever dare to cross you again." Chen Xiangdong stood up straight, towering over him, his voice booming with such immense volume that it reverberated across the entire backyard compound. Bellowing, "Let you off the hook? You literally snuck into a secure food supply warehouse to plant toxic disease-ridden rodent carcasses. If the factory workforce consumed contaminated food and suffered fatal medical emergencies tomorrow, who on earth was going to let me off the hook? Who was going to spare the lives of those innocent, hardworking laborers? This isn't a petty grudge anymore. This is deliberate, cold-blooded, attempted murder." The catastrophic commotion from the trap and the screaming had long since alerted the campus security division and the nearby worker dormitories. Within a mere handful of minutes, the chief of the security department spearheaded a tactical squad of 4 or 5 armed officers, their red armbands flashing under the beams of their high-powered flashlights, as they sprinted frantically into the backyard area with maximum urgency. Trailing closely behind them were over a dozen groggy laborers who had hastily thrown on jackets just to witness the dramatic spectacle. The security chief, panting heavily from the sprint, barked, "What the hell is going on here? Who is the scumbag responsible for triggering this massive riot tick?" Chen Xiangdong calmly turned around, gesturing with his finger toward the bloated, dead rats, the lock-picking wire, and the pathetic groveling figure of Wang Dabiao, stating, "Chief, you arrived at the perfect time. You've arrived at the absolute perfect moment. This scumbag was caught dead in the night picking the lock to our cafeteria's grain warehouse, with the malicious intent of dumping rotting rodent carcasses straight into our food supply. The toxic evidence and his lock-picking tools are all laid out right here, meaning we caught him completely red-handed on the spot with zero room for denial." The security chief violently swung his flashlight beam downward, and the exact moment he illuminated the repulsive maggot-infested evidence in Wang Dabiao's face, his expression turned entirely green with absolute blinding fury. The gathering crowd of factory workers took one look at the dead rats and completely exploded with rage. One of the laborers furiously spat on the ground, roaring, "This absolute animal Wang Dabiao is a subhuman piece of garbage. He actually had the audacity to contaminate the very food supply we eat with disgusting, rotting vermin." Another worker yelled, "Chef Chen worked tirelessly, all day long, just to serve us such phenomenally delicious and safe meals. Yet this treacherous bastard sneaks in under the cover of darkness to poison us. If this sabotage hadn't been exposed tonight and we consumed that food tomorrow, half the workforce would have ended up straight in the emergency room. This isn't a simple prank. This is a calculated, cold-blooded mass murder plot." Another voice shrieked, "Beat this pitch-black-hearted piece of trash to a pulp." And several hot-tempered laborers instantly lost their minds, lunging forward to brutally stomp on Wang Dabiao, only to be desperately held back by the strain of the security officers. The security chief pointed an angry finger at Wang Dabiao and roared, "You absolute son of a bitch, your sheer audacity is mind-boggling. To orchestrate a toxic, large-scale industrial sabotage plot right under our noses within this facility." He then aggressively waved his hand, barking, "Tie this dynamic scumbag up immediately." A squad of burly security officers swarmed the culprit, pulling out thick, heavy hemp ropes and with terrifying efficient speed. Bound Wang Dabiao so tightly he looked like a human dumpling completely immobilized. Wang Dabiao slumped onto the concrete floor utterly paralyzed and unable to mutter a single word of defense, with the mountain of irrefutable ironclad evidence staring him in the face. He was aggressively dragged out of the compound and sent straight to the local police station. Following the high-stakes arrest and removal of Wang Dabiao, the primary cafeteria's environment was completely purified of toxic threats. The massive workforce sprinted toward the cafeteria, the absolute second the shift bells rang every day, terrified that they would miss out on a single bite of Chen Xiangdong's legendary culinary creations. Then, on a particular morning around 10 a.m., the entire back kitchen was operating at maximum velocity, preparing for the lunch rush. And right as Chen Xiangdong tossed a massive batch of pork bones into a roaring cauldron of broth, the frantic echoing sound of hurried footsteps came racing from the hallway outside. The factory director came bursting into the back kitchen like his clothes were literally on fire. The second he crossed the threshold, he clutched the doorframe, panting erratically for air as he gasped, "Xiangdong! Drop what you're doing. Cease all operations immediately." A monumental high-stakes emergency has just unfolded. Chen Xiangdong calmly set down his massive soup ladle, thoroughly wiped his hands and asked with a smirk, "Did the sky just collapse, director? What could possibly have you in such a frantic, chaotic panic?" The factory director was stomping his feet in sheer, unadulterated anxiety, aggressively grabbing Chen Xiangdong by the arm. As he whispered frantically, "The top-tier high-ranking officials from the provincial government have just arrived for a surprise inspection. We had meticulously arranged for them to dine at the most luxurious state guest house in the entire city. But the top official possesses an incredibly stubborn, unyielding temperament and absolutely refused to go under any circumstances. He strictly insisted on coming directly to our primary cafeteria to sit down and consume a standard worker's meal side by side with the laborers. You tell me, how on earth are we supposed to handle this crisis?" Chen Xiangdong burst into a relaxed chuckle and said, "But director, this is fantastic news. It proves that this high-ranking official is genuinely down-to-earth and connected with the people, wanting to experience exactly what our everyday workforce eats on a daily basis. We should honestly just proceed with our standard cooking routine, shouldn't we?" The director's face flushed a deep crimson, his neck veins bulging as he snapped, "You don't know a damn thing. That is a monumental top-tier provincial powerhouse we are talking about. He is accustomed to feasting on the most decadent delicacies on a daily basis. If we serve him basic stewed cabbage with glass noodles, do you honestly believe a VIP of his stature can even swallow it? If he walks away feeling that our factory infrastructure is completely subpar, our funding and production quotas for the entire upcoming year will completely evaporate into thin air." The director instantly dropped his voice to a frantic whisper, pleading, "Xiangdong, listen to me carefully. Sprint over to the secure dry storage vault this very second and pull out every single bit of those ultra-premium luxury ingredients we meticulously hoarded away for the New Year celebrations. Slam all the dried sea cucumbers and scallops straight into warm water to rehydrate them instantly. Dice them up into microscopic pieces and blend them covertly right into the mass-produced dishes. Just ensure nobody can visually detect their presence. Now move your ass." Chen Xiangdong instantly shook his head in absolute refusal and countered, "Director, doing something like that is completely out of the question. It's an absolute line we cannot cross." The director completely lost his mind with anxiety, barking, "Why the hell not? We're at code red here." Chen Xiangdong replied, "Since the high-ranking official explicitly demanded to eat directly at the cafeteria, his true intent is to evaluate our authentic, raw, operational reality." Chen Xiangdong locked his eyes onto the panicked director and added, "If you secretly concoct a massive pot of sea, cucumber, and luxury scallops, a VIP like him will detect it with a single bite and he'll instantly view it as a deceptive, insulting cover-up. When that happens, the official will violently slam the table and storm out. And I highly doubt you'll even retain your position as factory director after that." The director aggressively wiped streams of cold sweat with his sleeve and stammered, "Then what do you suggest we do? Are you honestly telling me we should serve a top provincial leader nothing but basic cabbage and potatoes? That is remarkably pathetic and embarrassing. Where on earth am I supposed to hide my face?" Chen Xiangdong spun back around confidently, stepping back up to his massive wooden prep station, stating, "We will craft a traditional honest menu consisting of 4 classic dishes and 1 soup. Twice-cooked pork, authentic mapo tofu, garlic stir-fried seasonal greens, dry-fried string beans, and we'll round it off beautifully with a classic tomato and egg drop soup." The director practically leaped into the air with pure unadulterated desperation, shouting, "Are you totally insane? Those are the exact same basic dishes our laborers eat every single day. Utilizing such ordinary street food to entertain a massive high-ranking provincial dignitary. You have completely lost your mind." Chen Xiangdong aggressively hoisted his massive cleaver and countered, "Even with basic pork and humble tofu, I can easily elevate the flavors to a legendary state banquet tier. Just put your mind at ease, head back to the main dining hall, and get ready to entertain your high-profile guests. The factory director gritted his teeth in sheer frustration, frantically stomped his feet in desperation, and bolted right out to the door. Chen Xiangdong instantly spun back around, unleashing an absolute jaw-dropping masterclass, displaying the god-tier state banquet culinary blade skills he had painstakingly perfected across his entire past life. He selected a premium cut of pork belly boasting a flawless ratio of fat and lean meat, plunging it into a boiling cauldron until precisely 70% cooked before retrieving it to cool down. Next, he confidently gripped his massive heavy cleaver, the metal blade flashing with blinding speed, as a frantic, lightning-fast rhythm of chopping sounds reverberated relentlessly across the heavy prep board. A standard palm-sized chunk of pork belly was systematically flawlessly sliced into dozens of mesmerizing identical strips. Each individual slice was as shockingly paper-thin as a delicate wafer, possessing an absolute micro-perfect uniformity in both dimension and thickness. When held up against the ambient light of the window, the meat was literally translucent, yet the structural connection to the outer skin remained flawlessly intact and secure. The surrounding kitchen assistants stared at the spectacle, their eyes going completely wide with pure disbelief. Next came the absolute masterclass in heat management. Chen Xiangdong brought the massive iron wok up to a roaring heat, pouring in a precise ladle of base oil, before extending his hand over the surface to carefully gauge the ascending thermal radiation. Chen Xiangdong muttered under his breath, "Exactly 60% heat." Dropped the meat the moment the precisely sliced pork belly cascaded into the blazing wok. A magnificent, aggressive sizzle exploded through the air, and the meat strips rapidly contracted in the searing oil, their edges curling up beautifully into classic flawless little bowl shapes. This was the absolute defining make-or-break milestone of crafting twice-cooked pork, where the iconic curling technique relies entirely on masterful split-second control over the oil temperature. Immediately following that, he scooped a massive dollop of his secret recipe chili bean paste and hurled it straight into the blazing wok, causing the flames to violently erupt upward, as the rich red oil instantly unleashed a tyrannical, intensely addictive, spicy aroma that surged through the ventilation fans and drifted heavily all across the outdoor grounds. Simultaneously, the iconic mapo tofu was already roaring to life in the adjacent station. The delicate cubes of bean curd had been pre-treated in a light saltwater blanching bath to completely neutralize any raw, unappealing earthiness. Chen Xiangdong stir-fried the minced beef until beautifully crisp and aromatic before folding in the tofu, drenching the mixture in rich broth as it vigorously bubbled and simmered. Prior to plating, he meticulously introduced a cornstarch slurry in 3 distinct calculated intervals. The initial starch layer instantly locked the core flavors deep within the dish. The second application allowed the decadent sauce to perfectly coat every single block of tofu, while the final layer gave the entire masterpiece a brilliant mouth-watering sheen. To finalize the dish, he showered it in a generous dusting of freshly ground Sichuan peppercorn powder, splashing a final ladle of smoking hot oil directly over the top. A fierce, violent crackle erupted as an overwhelming blend of numbness, spice-blazing heat, and pure fragrance violently exploded through the entire back kitchen. The surrounding kitchen assistants caught a single drift of the majestic aroma and found their mouths watering uncontrollably from the sheer raw culinary perfection. Exactly at 12 p.m., the high-ranking provincial inspection delegation confidently strode straight into the primary cafeteria. The lead official was dressed in a remarkably humble plain blue cotton outfit, firmly shutting down any attempts to provide him with private VIP treatment, and heading directly into the main dining hall to sit at a massive ordinary round wooden table. He was completely surrounded by everyday factory laborers clutching their steel lunchboxes. Song Xiu-yun carefully walked over carrying several oversized rustic enamel basins, artfully arranging the freshly prepared feast onto the center of the table. The lead official cast a discerning glance downward, observing that it was indeed an honest, unpretentious spread of 4 classic dishes and 1 hearty soup, presented entirely in the cafeteria's standard-issue mess hall containers. Seeing this, the lead official's stern expression softened significantly. He nodded toward the terrified director and chuckled, "Oldly, it seems you didn't orchestrate any fraudulent, overly dramatic cover-ups this time around. The authentic setup here is absolutely phenomenal. Today, we shall immerse ourselves completely and experience the exact daily fuel our industrial workers rely upon." The director was frantically rubbing his sweaty palms together, his shirt completely drenched in anxious perspiration, as he forced a sycophantic smile and nodded repeatedly. The lead official confidently lifted his chopsticks, snatching a perfectly curled strip of twice-cooked pork and popping it straight into his mouth. He had barely chewed twice, before his hand holding the chopsticks suddenly froze dead in mid-air. His eyes instantly lighting up with pure unadulterated shock, this pork slice boasted a flawlessly caramelized, crisp exterior, while the melt-in-your-mouth fat practically dissolved into a rich, decadent liquid the millisecond it hit his tongue, leaving absolutely zero greasy aftertaste. The lean meat was completely saturated with the vibrant chili oil and savory bean paste, unleashing an increasingly powerful explosion of deep flavor with every single chew. That intense spice didn't scratch his throat at all. Instead, it masterfully extracted the natural premium sweetness of the pork, perfectly complemented by the crisp, refreshing crunch of the vibrant green garlic sprouts. The lead official didn't utter a single syllable. His chopsticks instantly lunged across the table, diving straight into the shimmering mapo tofu. He scooped up a massive, generous portion, blending it thoroughly into his steaming white rice, and aggressively shoveled a massive mouthful straight down his throat. A roaring combination of blistering heat and an electrifying tongue-numbing spice began to dance across his taste buds. The bean curd was so insanely silken and tender that it practically glided down his throat and into his stomach, while the beautifully crisp minced beef unleashed a spectacular, deeply savory crunch with every bite. Suddenly, the lead official violently slammed his hand onto the heavy wooden table and let out a thundering roar. Incredible! This sudden explosive outburst struck the adjacent factory director with such absolute terror that his entire body shuddered violently, nearly causing him to slip straight off his wooden bench and crash onto the floor. The lead official didn't even have time to waste on conversation. He hoisted his rice bowl close to his face and aggressively shoveled the food down at maximum speed. After annihilating the tofu, his chopsticks snatched another mouthful of the dry-fried string beans, savoring a gorgeous blistered char that beautifully encased the natural sweet freshness of the vegetable. Seeing their supreme leader devouring the food with such sheer primal ecstasy, the other high-ranking cadres instantly unleashed their chopsticks as well, and within seconds the entire table of VIPs lost all restraint. Chopsticks flashed like lightning in a frantic frenzy, diving up and down into the rustic enamel basins. A massive mountain of steaming white rice and 4 whole basins of culinary masterpieces were completely and utterly decimated, wiped bone dry in less than 20 minutes flat. One high-ranking cadre went so far as to grab a soft, fluffy steamed bun, using it like a sponge to aggressively soak up every single microscopic drop of savory sauce left at the bottom of the mapo tofu basin, scraping it completely spotless. The lead official finally set down his chopsticks, pulling out a crisp handkerchief to wipe the intense, satisfying beads of sweat from his forehead, his complexion glowing a vibrant, healthy crimson from the euphoric spice. The official turned his head toward the anxious director and commanded, "Bring the culinary mastermind behind this legendary feast out here immediately." The massive crushing boulder of anxiety in the director's chest finally evaporated, and he sprinted to the back kitchen at maximum speed, eagerly escorting Chen Xiangdong out to the main floor. Chen Xiangdong casually untied his stained apron, unhurriedly walked over to the VIP table, and delivered a perfectly poised greeting completely devoid of fear or pathetic brown-nosed flattery. The top provincial leader locked his eyes onto the remarkably sharp youthful chef, thrusting a massive thumb high into the air as he praised, "Young man, your god-tier culinary talent is absolutely unparalleled. To take incredibly ordinary everyday ingredients like basic pork belly and humble tofu, and flawlessly elevate them into an elite imperial state banquet level of culinary art is mind-blowing. This is what it truly means to be a champion chef dedicated to nourishing our hardworking blue-collar laborer brothers." Standing on the sidelines, the factory director was grinning so widely his face practically split open, his spine straightening up completely rigid with immense pride and newfound political clout. The top official then stood up to his full height, casting his gaze across the vast ocean of everyday factory workers currently dining throughout the hall, and boomed in a thundering voice, "This spectacular meal today has taught us a powerful, profound lesson. It has shown us real, unfiltered clarity. When it comes to boosting industrial production, we must remain grounded and operate with absolute integrity. Exactly like the flawless execution of this food. Zero fake smoke and mirrors, zero superficial showmanship. Just raw, unadulterated skill and authentic high-impact results." The provincial leader turned sharply to his elite entourage of cadres and aggressively waved his hand, ordering, "The exact second we return to headquarters, draft an official provincial directive. Every single heavy industry industrial cafeteria across the entire province is strictly ordered to study, replicate, and learn from Master Chef Chen's golden operational model." The precise second the provincial leader's luxury Honky limousine rolled out of the main complex gates, the elite directors from the primary machinery plant, the massive textile factory, and the powerhouse Red Star steel mill instantly swarmed the compound like a pack of ravenous wolves cornering Chen Xiangdong. Director Zhao of the machinery plant, infamous for his notoriously short fuse and aggressive temperament, viciously clamped his iron grip around Chen Xiangdong's wrist, yelling, "Master Chef Chen, we all distinctly heard the top official's glowing endorsement with our very own ears just now. A legendary culinary talent like yours absolutely cannot be hogged exclusively by this single factory. Our machinery plant houses an army of over 8,000 starving industrial laborers, who are forced to choke down dry stale buns and pathetic watery pickled cabbage soup day in and day out. Our workforce is completely devoid of any real sustenance or proper nutrition. You absolutely must come take over and revolutionize our cafeteria operations immediately. Meanwhile, Director Lee of the sprawling textile factory, a fiercely competitive female executive. Director Lee of the textile factory turned out to be a powerhouse of a woman. Stamped her feet in sheer frantic desperation, elbowing her way straight to the front as she shrieked, "Oh, Chow! Back off and get in line." Our facility employs the highest number of female workers, who handle the most grueling, hyper-precise manual labor, meaning they deserve a comforting, high-quality hot meal far more than anyone else. Master Chef Chen. If you choose our textile factory first name, your price, any condition you demand, will be instantly granted. Director Sun of the steel mill was an absolute giant of a man, possessing a voice that boomed like a violent thunderstorm, as he aggressively shoved the other two aside, roaring, "Stop wasting your breath." Our steelworkers roast in front of a scorching furnace all day long, sweating out far more fluid than you weaklings consume water. Our physical stamina is drained to the absolute limit, so Master Chef Chen must prioritize our steel mill above all else. These three heavyweight industrial moguls screamed at each other right at the cafeteria entrance, their faces flushing crimson and neck veins bulging, as absolutely none of them showed even a shred of willingness to back down. Chen Xiangdong stared into those 6 desperate eyes glowing with absolute ravenous hunger, and while he was secretly laughing with pure ecstatic joy on the inside, his outward expression remained flawlessly calm, collected, and unfazed. He gently but firmly pried Director Chow's iron grip off his wrist, nonchalantly dusted off his cooking apron, and smiled, saying, "Respected directors, everyone here shares the exact same noble goal, ensuring our working class brothers get top-tier nourishment. There's absolutely no need to ruin your professional relationships over this. As long as you place your complete unwavering faith in me, Chen Xiangdong, I will officially take over and revolutionize the cafeterias of all 3 factories simultaneously." The 3 directors froze dead in their tracks on the spot, utterly dumbfounded. Combining all 3 massive workforces meant catering to nearly 20,000 starving mouths. This young man's ambition and appetite for control were insanely massive. But Chen Xiangdong gave them absolutely zero time to second guess or hesitate. That very same afternoon, armed with freshly drafted catering concession contracts, he systematically knocked on the doors of all 3 executive offices one by one. With the forceful stamp of the official red ink pads, the 3 signed contracts were securely tucked into his breast pocket. In a mere 24 hours, Chen Xiangdong had pulled off the unthinkable, conquering the food supply chains of the city's top 3 mega factories. Yet by expanding his empire so aggressively, hidden catastrophic vulnerabilities immediately began to violently fracture his operations. Even though Chen Xiangdong had 4 loyal apprentices training under his direct command, managing an empire of this scale alone was a physical impossibility for a single human being. 4 massive mega factories combined meant over 20,000 ravenous mouths to feed, making every single lunch rush feel like a brutal, chaotic war zone. By the mere 3rd day of taking over, the machinery plant's cafeteria completely exploded into a riot of furious complaints. "What kind of absolute garbage pig feed is this supposed to be? It tastes totally bland." And they had the nerve to claim this garbage was state banquet tier culinary art. Who are they trying to scam? A senior machinist, his face completely caked in pitch black industrial grease and sweat, violently slammed his aluminum lunchbox right onto the stainless steel counter of the service window, sending greasy soup splashing in every single direction, and drenching the terrified lunch lady's uniform. The ocean of dozens of laborers waiting in line behind him immediately joined the chaotic uproar, clanking their metal containers as they bellowed, "Damn right. Yesterday's twice-cooked pork was genuinely aromatic and elite, but today's meat slices are as tough and dry as old shoe leather. We can barely even chew through this garbage. Give us a total refund on our meal tickets right now." The second apprentice, Juzi, who was personally running the machinery plant's kitchen operations, was sweating profusely from sheer panic. He stood in front of the colossal industrial wok, clutching a massive iron ladle, completely overwhelmed, his face flushing a deep crimson as he stammered, "Everyone, please calm down. I completely lost control of the heat management. I'll recook it right now. I swear I'll recook your ass. We have to meet massive production quotas this afternoon. Who the hell has time to sit around and wait for you?" The workers' fury was escalating at an alarming velocity, and the entire cafeteria was right on the verge of being completely ransacked. The second he received the emergency distress call, Chen Xiangdong hopped onto his vintage bicycle, pedaling like an absolute demon to rush straight to the chaotic scene. He aggressively pushed his way through the rioting crowd and strode into the back kitchen, snatching up a pair of pristine chopsticks, to grab a single slice of the controversial twice-cooked pork from the mass basin, popping it into his mouth to analyze the texture for a brief second. Chen Xiangdong's brows instantly knitted into a sharp frown, and he spat the meat straight into the waste bucket, muttering, "The pork is severely overcooked. The moisture is entirely dehydrated, and the chili bean paste was dumped in with zero portion control, making it unbearably salty while the MSG didn't even dissolve properly, leaving a bizarre, totally unappetizing chemical aftertaste. This isn't a premium gourmet boxed meal. This is a catastrophic disaster that will completely destroy our hard-earned reputation." Chen Xiangdong didn't waste a single syllable on useless excuses. He systematically issued a double refund on meal tickets to every outraged worker on the spot, using every ounce of his diplomacy to finally de-escalate the situation and clear the room. Back in the kitchen, Juzi hung his head low against the wall, his eyes completely bloodshot with tears. As his voice trembled violently, "Master, I genuinely gave it everything I had. But preparing bulk meals for thousands of people makes the industrial wok insanely heavy, and the second I panicked, I completely blanked out on the precise measurements for the salt. So I just ended up throwing handfuls in blindly based on pure guesswork. I ruined everything. I'm so incredibly sorry I failed you." Chen Xiangdong gently tapped Juzi on the shoulder, completely suppressing any urge to explode in anger because he understood a fundamental reality. The absolute greatest Achilles heel of traditional Chinese culinary arts is its overwhelming hyper-reliance on a chef's individual split-second instinct and experience. The moment you switch the person or alter the hardware, the final output changes completely. Even shifting a chef's underlying mood will cause the final flavor profile to deviate drastically. If he ever wanted to scale his culinary empire to a massive level, relying on traditional word-of-mouth apprenticeship training was a complete dead end. He absolutely had to implement cutthroat modernized corporate management frameworks. That very same evening, Chen Xiangdong summoned Zhang Xuyun and his 4 loyal apprentices directly to his house for an emergency tactical meeting. Zhang Xuyun stared at Chen Xiangdong's severely bloodshot, exhausted eyes, her heart aching as she handed him a cup of hot tea, pleading, "Xiangdong, if it's truly getting this unmanageable, let's just forfeit 2 of the factory contracts. There is no limit to the wealth we can acquire, but our physical health simply cannot sustain this brutal, chaotic pace." Chen Xiangdong took a slow sip of the piping hot tea, his gaze sharpening and glowing with an even more intense, unyielding resolve as he countered, "Forfeit. There is absolutely no world where we voluntarily spit out prime meat that's already in our mouths. If we are severely short on manpower, and our quality control is dangerously unstable, then we will simply revolutionize our entire operational blueprint." The absolute next morning, Chen Xiangdong instantly slapped down $500 in cash, securing a lease on a massive abandoned historical grain warehouse located right outside the industrial sector. He then pulled strings through the neighborhood subdistrict office, recruiting 50 highly efficient, rapid-fire, laid-off female workers on the spot. Effective from this very second, the individual kitchens of all 4 major factories would completely terminate their localized chopping and washing operations. Every single raw ingredient would be transported directly to this centralized hub for hyper-efficient processing, standing dead center in the cavernous historic warehouse. Chen Xiangdong bellowed his absolute non-negotiable operational guidelines. Massive industrial washing stations were constructed overnight, and over a dozen heavy-duty prep boards were aligned in a flawless linear formation, with the 50 female workers divided into highly specialized laser-focused teams to execute a relentless assembly line operation. The potato washing crew focused exclusively on cleansing. The peeling squad handled nothing but skinning, while the butcher team focused solely on slicing meat. The precision-cut ingredients were systematically packed into oversized plastic crates, undergoing meticulous strict measurement using heavy-duty scales, while the massive bottleneck of bulk prep work was completely resolved. The absolute core challenge of standardized elite flavor consistency remained wide open. Chen Xiangdong barricaded himself alone inside an isolated private chamber, grinding relentlessly through 2 excruciating days and 2 sleepless nights. He pulled every connection he had to acquire a medical-grade hyper-precise microanalytical scale, determined to translate the legendary recipes stored in his brain into a foolproof automated system that any low-skill worker could execute perfectly. Exactly how many grams of salt? And precisely how many milliliters of soy sauce? Exactly how many pieces of star anise? And precisely how many grains of Sichuan peppercorn? Chen Xiangdong utilized the microscale to meticulously calculate and measure every single grain, pre-packaging the precise formulations into individual transparent plastic bags, using the heat of a candle-warmed saw blade to flawlessly seal them airtight. Spice pack number 1 was mathematically calibrated exclusively for twice-cooked pork. Spice pack number 2 was custom engineered solely for stir-fried, hot and sour potato strips. Chen Xiangdong gestured toward the towering mountain of hundreds of finished spice packets covering the table, and barked to his inner circle, "Listen up, boys. You look at me and I look at you." But absolutely none of them had ever witnessed culinary arts being systemized like an elite tech operation. "Juzi, you're up first, test the system, so." Chen Xiangdong pushed a precise crate of pre-chopped ingredients, flawlessly portioned pork belly and a single unit of spice pack number 1 right into his hands, commanding execute exactly on my mark. Searing hot wok cold base oil dropped the meat slices. Stir fry aggressively until the pork edges curl and the rich oils render out. Then tear open spice pack number 1, dump it straight in. Toss it precisely 15 times and plate it instantly. Chen Xiangdong stood over him like a drill sergeant, staring at a precision stopwatch as he barked orders. Juzi inhaled deeply, following the sequence flawlessly as a violent sizzle exploded. The exact microsecond the standardized seasoning hit the blazing iron, A majestic concentrated wave of savory bean paste and decadent pork aroma blasted into the atmosphere. The finished masterpiece cascaded into the rustic enamel basin, and the apprentices frantically scrambled with their chopsticks to take a bite, their eyes instantly bulging out of their skulls in sheer disbelief. This is a total game changer. The depth of flavor was practically indistinguishable from a batch cooked personally by the master himself. Juzi slapped his thigh in an absolute frenzy of excitement, shouting a barrage of bewildered praises. Chen Xiangdong let out a confident, knowing smile. With these hyper-standardized seasoning packs locked down, even a low-tier amateur who only knows how to basic toss a wok can consistently pump out legendary god-tier flavors. With that, his central kitchen went into absolute overdrive, firing on all cylinders. Every single morning at exactly 4 a.m., a disciplined fleet of over a dozen cargo tricycles formed a tight, synchronized convoy, rolling out of the historic grain warehouse with clockwork precision. Crates upon crates of flawlessly processed clean ingredients, alongside secure boxes of meticulously cataloged custom allocated spice packs, were smoothly, flawlessly mobilized to supply the cafeterias of all 4 mega factories. The second the clock struck 11:30 a.m., the intense shift-end factory sirens blared, and an ocean of over 20,000 ravenous laborers swarmed simultaneously into their respective mess halls. Colossal winding queues materialized in front of the service windows like massive dragons, as piping hot, freshly mass-produced delicacies were paraded out, unleashing an intoxicating, irresistible aroma that saturated the air for miles. Whether you walked into the heavy machinery plant or the sprawling textile factory, the epic twice-cooked pork devoured by the industrial laborers consistently delivered the exact same legendary, savory, sweet punch of intense chili flavor, with each delicate strip of meat carved to a flawlessly uniform thickness. Even the simple potato shreds maintained that identical, hyper-addictive crisp snap and tangy sweetness, with every single strand perfectly defined and separated. This Master Chef Chen is an absolute culinary god. Our factory's mess hall grub finally tastes exactly like the legendary elite dishes over at the primary cafeteria. Laborers squatted in groups beneath the shade of the trees, aggressively shoveling food from their lunchboxes, their mouths completely glistening with savory oils, as they showered the meal with endless praise. From that monumental day forward, not a single meal refund request ever occurred again. Instead, lucrative food tickets from all 4 major mega factories flooded into Chen Xiangdong's pockets daily like an unstoppable winter blizzard. Every single evening, the moment they returned home, Song Xiuyun would violently dump the contents of 4 massive canvas sacks directly onto the heated brick bed, sending a dazzling cascade of multicolored meal vouchers and small denomination cash notes, erupting into a literal mountain of wealth. She sat up every single night, meticulously sorting the fortune until the clock struck midnight, her fingertips aching and growing completely numb from the friction. Yet a radiant, ecstatic smile remained permanently plastered across her face. A colossal high-revenue fast food empire dominating the city's entire industrial sector had officially undeniably established its absolute supremacy. The daily revenue exploded to a staggering tens of thousands of dollars. Then, during one particular lunch rush, Chen Xiangdong was deep in the books auditing the accounts in the back office of the primary cafeteria, when old Li, an elite grade 8 master machinist, shuffled over, clutching his aluminum lunchbox, his face completely twisted in a miserable scowl as he lit a cigarette and whispered, "Boss Chen, your cafeteria's culinary execution is absolutely flawless. I could literally devour this daily and never get sick of it. But damn, my heart is just suffocating under an unbearable weight right now." Old Li let out a heavy taking a deep, aggressive drag from his cigarette, as the deep wrinkles on his forehead knitted even closer together. Chen Xiangdong calmly accepted a cigarette offered by the man, tucking it behind his ear as he asked with a warm smile, "Uncle Li, what kind of catastrophic crisis has you feeling this down?" Old Li groaned, "My son is tying the knot next week, and the bride's high-maintenance family is demanding several tables of a hyper-prestigious, luxurious wedding banquet. But I can't exactly drag the future in-laws straight into a bleak factory mess hall to feed them basic mass-produced worker food, now can I?" Old Li aggressively slapped his thigh in sheer unadulterated frustration venting. "Just yesterday, I escorted them into the city center to scope out the state-run Red Star restaurant. Good God, those arrogant servers practically looked down their noses at us like we were dirt, slamming the plates onto the table with such violent force that the hot soup splattered all over my clothes. They acted as if I personally owed them a mountain of cash. To make matters worse, their overhyped food didn't even taste half as legendary as your everyday cooking. Yet the final bill was astronomically, unforgivably expensive. I was so incredibly furious that I couldn't sleep a single wink the entire night. Hearing this, Chen Xiangdong narrowed his eyes instantly, a brilliant blueprint forming within his mind. Nowadays, the common folk finally have disposable income burning a hole in their pockets, and dining out at restaurants is no longer a rare luxury. Relying solely on mass-produced factory meals wouldn't rake in the truly massive fortunes. The working class demanded status and respect, while the wealthy craved absolute prestige and luxury. He desperately needed to pivot his business model to the absolute top of the market. The very next morning at the break of dawn, Chen Xiangdong grabbed Juzi and headed straight for the most bustling, hyper-prosperous intersection in the dead center of the city. A massive vacant 3-story red brick building stood proudly facing the main street, occupying an absolute goldmine location. Without wasting a single syllable, he pulled out a thick, intimidating stack of hard cash and slammed it onto the housing office desk, locking down a long-term commercial lease on the spot. A massive vibrant red plaque was custom-made overnight and hoisted to the very top of the building, bearing the name Fengdeng Grand Restaurant just half a month later. The extensive interior renovations were fully completed. The ground floor main dining hall was vast, luminous, and breathtakingly spacious, featuring dozens of massive round tables draped in pristine white cloths, while the second and third floors were meticulously partitioned into ultra-exclusive private VIP suites. The floors were lined with plush crimson carpets, and shimmering crystal chandeliers hung brilliantly from above. This level of sheer opulence was absolutely unprecedented throughout the entire city. On the afternoon, just a single day before the grand opening, the manager from the rival establishment right across the street, Manager Lee of the Red Star restaurant, came strolling over with his hands arrogantly tucked behind his back. Sporting a slicked-back, greased hairstyle, he casually held a vintage enamel tea mug, stamped with bright red lettering, accompanied by 2 massive heavy-set chefs wearing looks of pure, unadulterated defiance. Manager Lee sneered, "Hey, Boss Chen, you're nothing but a low-tier cafeteria contractor who cooks basic mass-produced slave food. What kind of absolute joke are you trying to pull by acting like a big-shot mogul in the city center?" Manager Lee stood at the bottom of the entrance steps, aggressively spitting on the ground, and curled his lip as he added, "The monthly rent for a 3-story building like this is astronomically high. Exactly how many cheap box lunches do you think you have to sell just to break even? Don't come crying when you lose your absolute shirt in this market, and have to pack up your sheets to flee under the cover of darkness in the dead of night." Chen Xiangdong was actively directing the construction crew to move heavy chairs inside, and letting out a cold, razor-sharp chuckle upon hearing the blatant insult. He casually dusted the debris off his hands. He stepped forward and countered, "Manager Lee, you're sticking your nose way too far into my business. My establishment's ground floor will serve hyper-affordable, high-quality bulk meals, so the everyday working class can dine like royalty without breaking the bank, while the second and third floors will execute elite premium state banquet-level culinary masterpieces to give the wealthy elite a mind-blowing, luxurious gastronomic experience. We operate in completely different leagues, so mind your own storefront." "Why the hell are you losing sleep over my wallet anyway?" Manager Lee reacted as if he had just heard the absolute joke of the century, laughing so violently that the tea inside his enamel mug splashed all over the place, while the 2 heavy-set chefs behind him burst into a mocking synchronized roar of laughter. "State banquet cuisine, pfft, coming from a low-class country bumpkin like you. Have you ever even seen what a real imperial state banquet looks like in your entire life? Do you honestly think tossing some basic potato shreds counts as high-end cuisine? I'm going to personally watch you crash and burn during your grand opening tomorrow. If this pathetic joint manages to survive for even a single month, I will literally chew up this entire enamel mug, crunch it to pieces, and swallow it whole." Chen Xiangdong completely ignored his pathetic petty barking, turning around to yell straight into the back kitchen, "Juzi, bring out our freshly prepared signature tasting dishes and display them right at the front entrance. Let's expand Manager Lee's extremely narrow mind and show him true mastery." Juzi bellowed a confident response and sprinted back into the kitchen, reappearing at the main entrance holding a massive heavy clay pot, before violently lifting the lid off with a dramatic flourish. An overwhelmingly decadent, robust aroma of slow-braised meat, infused with a complex premium medicinal herbal fragrance, blasted directly into the sky, savagely invading the nostrils of everyone in the immediate vicinity. Passers-by froze in their tracks instantly, their mouths watering as they swallowed hard. The absolute second Manager Lee caught a whiff of this god-tier scent. The arrogant, mocking sneer on his face froze completely rigid. He was a seasoned restaurant industry veteran himself, and with just a single sniff he knew with absolute certainty that this god-level heat control and precise ingredient blending were things no ordinary chef could ever replicate. His entire complexion instantly turned pale, and letting out a bitter defensive grunt, he turned around and retreated with his 2 chefs like a bunch of defeated tail-tucked dogs. On the monumental day of the grand opening, dozens of massive 80,000 count firecracker strands exploded in a deafening, chaotic symphony, and even before the thick gray gunpowder smoke could fully dissipate, the grand restaurant's entrance was already completely swarmed by a colossal wall of people, packed so incredibly tight that there wasn't a single square inch of standing room left. The entire main street was completely gridlocked and paralyzed. Old Lee showed up with dozens of his fellow factory laborers to show their massive support, while a crowd of wealthy local business moguls also swarmed the area to see if the hype was real. Chen Xiangdong dragged out a long wooden bench, stepped up onto it, and hoisted a metallic megaphone to address the crowd booming, "Respected neighbors and hard-working factory brothers. Today marks the grand unveiling of the Fengdeng Grand Restaurant. On our ground floor dining hall, a premium combo of one meat dish and two vegetable sides costs just $1. And steaming hot white rice is absolutely unlimited." The massive crowd completely exploded into a frenzy of pure excitement. This insane price point was literally more than 50% cheaper than any state-run eatery in town. Everyone's eyes flared with an absolute ravenous hunger, and they were right on the verge of rushing the doors to claim a table. But before the crowd could violently surge forward, Chen Xiangdong dynamically pivoted his megaphone upward and detonated an absolute tactical nuclear bomb of an announcement. Starting this very second, this grand establishment is officially launching an elite VIP prepaid membership card. Deposit $100 into your account today and I will instantly gift you an extra $20 for free. Deposit $500 and you'll receive a staggering $100 bonus cash injection on the spot, plus an exclusive lifetime VIP privilege to completely skip the lines for our upper-level private suites. The exact microsecond those words echoed through the air, the entire venue plunged into a dead-stunned silence for 3 whole seconds. For the citizens living back in the rigid era of the 1980s, who on earth had ever encountered a hyper-modern retail loyalty strategy like top-up bonus marketing? Everyone anxiously glanced back and forth at one another, exchanging bewildered, highly skeptical looks, with absolutely no one daring to be the very first to pull out their hard-earned cash. Standing across the street, on his building steps, Manager Lee watched eagerly, waiting to savor a total failure. Screaming at the top of his lungs, "Folks, do not fall for this blatant scam. This guy is clearly trying to embezzling your cash before skipping town under the cover of darkness. There is absolutely no business on God's green earth that gives away free money. The moment you hand your savings over to him, I guarantee he will completely vanish off the face of the earth by tomorrow morning." Chen Xiangdong, completely unfazed and cool as ice, casually gestured toward the back kitchen, prompting a highly disciplined line of servers dressed in pristine white uniforms to march out proudly, each carrying elegant service trays. Resting on those trays were delicate porcelain bowls filled with a broth so flawlessly clear you could see the bottom, wherein floated a head of Chinese cabbage meticulously carved into a breathtaking blooming lotus flower. This was the legendary god-tier national banquet masterpiece steamed cabbage in supreme broth. This ultra-elite stock had been intensely simmered using mature free-range hens, aged ducks, and premium cured hams for over a dozen grueling hours, before being clarified using finely minced chicken breast to completely filter out every microscopic impurity, leaving it looking exactly like crystal clear boiling water, yet possessing a mind-blowing flavor profile that would literally make you lose your absolute mind from pure ecstasy. Effective right now, anyone who activates a VIP membership card will receive a complimentary bowl of this legendary broth to sample. Chen Xiangdong dynamically announced to the swarming crowd. Director Yang of the machinery plant just so happened to be passing by the bustling area, aggressively elbowing his way through the massive crowd to pick up a sampling bowl and take a sip. The absolute millisecond that tiny splash of liquid hit his palate, Director Yang's eyes violently bulged out of his skull in sheer unadulterated shock. This broth appeared visually as simple and transparent as plain boiling water. Yet the moment it rolled over his tongue, an explosion of pure umami sent violent shivers down his entire spine. The concentrated essence of chicken pork and dried scallops was flawlessly fused into a single drop, tasting so profoundly rich that he felt like he was going to accidentally swallow his own tongue. Holy hell, this soup is an absolute masterpiece. It's so hyper savory, it's literally driving my taste buds insane. Activate a maximum tier $500 VIP membership card for me right this instant. Director Yang roared at the absolute top of his lungs, whipping out a thick flexing stack of large denomination banknotes and violently slamming them onto the registration desk, with a powerful, respected industrial titan taking the absolute lead, compounded by that devastatingly intoxicating, irresistible aroma filling the air. The massive crowd completely lost its collective mind and went into a state of absolute rabid hysteria. Sign me up for a $100 card right now. Put me down for a $300 tier and make sure you lock in an upper-level VIP suite for me immediately. I'm hosting a massive luxury banquet for my clients tomorrow. Stop pushing me, damn it. I was here first to hand over my cash. Hey, watch out. Who the hell just stepped on my shoe? A massive chaotic queue materialized instantly in front of the cashier counter, and thick stacks of heavy banknotes flooded into the cash box like an absolute tidal wave. The clerk was counting the incoming fortune so furiously that her fingertips were practically smoking. Standing right across the street, Manager Lee watched the entire scene, his eyeballs literally about to pop out of his skull and drop onto the concrete. His entire hand trembled so violently that his vintage enamel tea mug crashed onto the ground, chipping off a massive chunk of its paint. He couldn't comprehend this reality no matter how hard his brain struggled. How on earth could food be marketed in such a revolutionary way? And how could money be legally raked in like an absolute bank heist? Meanwhile, the expansive ground floor dining hall was packed entirely to maximum capacity, with even the narrow aisles crammed full of makeshift foldable stools. Back in the kitchen, the heavy iron woks were being tossed so aggressively that sparks were literally flying. Juzi was leading a squad of over a dozen prep cooks hacking and portioning ingredients, while sweating profusely from the absolute intensity of the rush. The booming roars of the servers calling out completed dishes echoed through the hall, wave after magnificent wave. Up on the second and third floors, the ultra-exclusive private luxury suites were completely locked down and bought out by the wealthiest business tycoons in the entire city. Chen Xiangdong personally took total command of the blazing stoves, whipping up legendary braised intestines, exquisite scallion braised sea cucumber, and pristine sweet and sour squirrelfish, demanding ultra-elite culinary masterpieces requiring god-tier knife skills and perfect heat control were paraded onto the tables, causing those elite high rollers to repeatedly flash enthusiastic double thumbs up in pure awe. It was as if they hadn't tasted a single dish this authentic in their entire lives, unanimously declaring activating this VIP membership card was the greatest investment I've ever made. When closing time finally arrived that night, the heavy rolling iron shutters were violently pulled down, and Song Shu-yeon sat inside the accounting office, the massive desk before her completely buried under an absolute ocean of hard cash. Towering mountains of large banknotes, $5 bills, and $1 notes piled up into a literal monolith of wealth. She dragged the internal cashiers to count the fortune alongside her, their fingers developing severe painful muscle cramps from the continuous friction. As the final metrics on the ledger snowballed into an astronomically larger figure, Song Shu-yeon gasped, "Xiangdong, just from the VIP membership card activations alone today, the cash we generated has completely shattered the $100,000 mark." Song Shu-yeon's voice shook with unadulterated emotion, her eyes turning bloodshot with tears of pure disbelief, as she tightly, desperately gripped Chen Xiangdong's arm. Chen Xiangdong casually leaned against the doorframe, lighting up a cigarette and exhaling a perfect smooth ring of white smoke, before turning his gaze toward the hyper-prosperous shimmering nightscape outside the window. It was now the monumental night of New Year's Eve, and a brutal heavy blizzard was raging outside, the icy wind lashing against open skin with a stinging burning bite. Yet inside the ultra-luxurious Grand Imperial Suite of the Fengdeng Restaurant Grandi restaurant, the high-end heating units were blasting a blistering cozy warmth, causing the massive glass windows to be completely blanketed in thick foggy condensation. Song Shu-yeon sat elegantly upon a premium imported genuine leather sofa, completely enveloped in a luxurious jet black mink coat, her cheeks glowing with a radiant, healthy flush, radiating the unmistakable aura of high society elite wealth. Cradled gently in her arms was their chubby, healthy baby boy who had just hit his 100-day milestone, and the moment she playfully shook a vintage rattle. The little guy, dressed in a festive red padded jacket, instantly flashed a wide toothless grin, and burst into the most adorable innocent giggles. Downstairs in the kitchen, the roaring furnace fires were blazing with absolute intensity, since today was New Year's Eve. The grand restaurant was officially closed to the public. Chen Xiangdong didn't let a single one of his line cooks touch the stoves, personally tying on a crisp white apron and stepping up to the execution station, specifically to cook for the Day One crew who had helped him conquer this culinary empire from the trenches, crafting the ultimate New Year's Eve feast. A massive 5-pound carp lay perfectly prepared on the heavy prep block, and Chen Xiangdong's cleaver blurred with lightning-fast precision, with a dynamic seasoned flick of his wrist. The razor-sharp blade glided flawlessly along the fish skeleton in a few strokes, intricately scoring the flesh into a breathtaking, perfectly detailed huiyuan ear pattern. He fired up the wok, pouring in a generous amount of pure oil, and the exact moment a wisp of blue smoke billowed from the surface, he gripped the fish by its tail and smoothly slid it into the searing liquid. An aggressive, violent sizzle erupted as the hot oil churned, and the scored fish flesh instantly locked into shape, frying to a flawless golden brown ultra-crispy perfection. Simultaneously, his other hand gripped a heavy ladle, adding refined white sugar and aged black vinegar into the adjacent wok, to reduce down into a deeply rich, brilliantly shimmering sweet and sour glaze. With a masterful swirl, he cascaded the boiling glaze over the perfectly fried carp, unleashing an intoxicating aroma that blasted straight through the exhaust fans and into the night air. Chen Xiangdong bellowed a triumphant cry, "Sweet and sour carp. May every single year bring absolute abundance and prosperity." Plating the masterpiece onto a colossal platter, he marched upstairs with powerful strides. The massive round table in the imperial suite was already fully loaded with decadent braised pork knuckles, scallion braised sea cucumbers, and various other elite top-tier delicacies. Juzi, along with over a dozen of the absolute Day One brothers, who had backed Chen Xiangdong since the humble days of selling street lunchboxes, were gathered tightly around the feast, aggressively swallowing their saliva in anticipation. Today, every single one of them had dripped out in brand new premium wool overcoats, sporting gleaming mirror-polished leather shoes, with their hair slicked back flawlessly and shining under the crystal chandeliers. Who on earth could have predicted that just a few short months ago? They were nothing but desperate down-and-out broke cute guys who couldn't even scrounge up 2 dimes. From their empty pockets, Chen Xiangdong pushed the heavy door open and walked in, placing the spectacular sweet and sour carp dead center on the rotating table, untying his apron and casually draping it over the back of his chair, before pulling out the seat of honor and settling down. Led by Juzi, all dozen of the hardened men instantly stood up straight in absolute profound respect, screaming at the top of their lungs, "Brother Dong!" Chen Xiangdong dismissively waved his hand and replied, "Everyone sit down. Today is New Year's Eve, so there are no bosses and no employees here. We are all brothers of the same family. Stuff your faces to your heart's content, and drink until you can't stand day." Only then did the crew finally take their seats, grabbing their chopsticks and aggressively unhinging their jaws to feast like savages. Chen Xiangdong's master-level culinary execution was something wealthy corporate tycoons spending hundreds of dollars could rarely savor. And this squad of brothers ate until their mouths glistered with oil, giving endless thumbs up. Midway through the intense drinking session, 7 or 8 empty liquor bottles were already rolling across the table. Chen Xiangdong lit up a cigarette, taking a slow drag, and turned his head to shoot a meaningful glance toward Song Xiuyun on the sofa. Song Xiuyun gently placed their soundly sleeping son into the stroller, turning around to pull out a heavy canvas bag from the cabinet that was bursting at the absolute seams. She walked over to the round table and tossed it dead center onto the lazy Susan, zipping it open to reveal rows upon rows of immaculately stacked pristine large denomination bills, forming a mesmerizing bright crimson mountain of hard cash. The entire room instantly plunged into a silence so profound you could hear a pin drop. The brothers froze mid-chew with meat still in their mouths, their eyes completely locked onto that mountain of wealth in a hypnotic stare. And not a single soul bothered to pick up the chopsticks that slipped onto the table. Chen Xiangdong smoothly exhaled a perfect ring of smoke, crushing his cigarette butt in the ashtray before stating, "This year everyone has endured immense hardships following me, Chen Xiangdong. In the dead of freezing winter, you pushed handcarts outside the factory gates and endured the bitter cold, even getting into vicious fistfights with that corrupt security department crew. In the blistering summer, you braved the scorching sun to source ingredients from the countryside." He pointed directly at the absolute fortune piled on the table and continued, "I made a vow back then. If you ride or die with me, I will ensure you feast like kings. Today is New Year's, so it's time to slice up the ultimate pie." He grabbed a massive bundled brick of cash and slammed it violently onto the table, bellowing, "Juzi!" Juzi jumped out of his skin in absolute shock, instantly snapping to attention while frantically wiping the grease from his hands onto his pants. Chen Xiangdong scooped up 3 massive bundles of cash and threw them directly into Juzi's trembling arms, declaring, "This is $3,000 straight cash, your year-end bonus. Take it home, buy yourself a massive luxury property in the city center next spring, and throw a legendary wedding to marry a beautiful wife." Juzi clutched the cash as his knees buckled violently, nearly dropping to the floor. $3,000. Back when he was a low-tier apprentice laborer, his monthly salary was a pathetic $28. This was a fortune he couldn't save up in a decade of working without eating or drinking. Juzi's eyes instantly turned bloodshot, and his voice cracked with pure emotion as he choked out, "Brother Dong, this is way too much cash. I just chop up vegetables and run basic errands for you. I don't deserve to take home this massive a fortune." Chen Xiangdong's eyes glared with absolute authority, and he boomed, "Back when Wang Dabiao brought his thugs to completely smash our street stall, you shielded my body and took a brutal pipe strike straight to your back. This fortune was earned by you putting your absolute life on the line. Take it!" Juzi desperately clutched the brick of cash to his chest, massive teardrops relentlessly splashing down his face, as he stood completely paralyzed and speechless. Chen Xiangdong continued roaring, "Dakyang tu $200, ergo $2,000. With every single name Chen Xiangdong bellowed, he launched 2 massive bundles of cash across the table. Every last one of the dozen brothers was now holding a ridiculously thick stack of pristine banknotes in their hands, and this group of hardened, rugged men were all weeping like absolute babies, frantically wiping their tears away with their rough coat sleeves, as they stared down at the fortune in their hands, feeling like they were trapped in a surreal dream. Just a few short months ago, they were desperately stressing over where their next meal would come from, constantly being terrorized and extorted by Wang Dabiao's gang of ruthless local mobsters. Now Wang Dabiao was locked away in a high-security prison cell serving a multi-year sentence for poisoning, while they were sitting comfortably in the most ridiculously luxurious Grand Imperial restaurant in the entire city, holding thousands of dollars of life-changing cash in their palms. Juzi suddenly whirled around with explosive energy, grabbing a massive glass decanter completely filled to the brim with high-proof liquor, hoisting it high as he roared, "Brother Dong, sister-in-law, I'm just an uneducated country boy who lacks proper manners, and I don't know how to deliver a sophisticated poetic speech. But from this exact second onward, my entire life belongs strictly to Brother Dong. I am downing this entire glass right now." The moment the words left his mouth, he aggressively tilted his neck back, forcing over half a pound of burning maximum-proof white liquor straight down his throat. Dakyang and Ergu instantly seized their massive glasses and chugged them down in a single breath. Screaming at the top of their lungs, Brother Dong downed the hatch. All dozen hardened men raised their glasses in unison, throwing their heads back to slam the alcohol. Standing proudly right behind Chen Xiangdong Song Shuyun, gazed upon this group of flushing, hyper-emotional, fiercely loyal men, then looked down at the completely emptied canvas bag, feeling a sharp wave of intense emotion sting her eyes. Just a little over a single year ago, their household was so utterly impoverished that they couldn't even afford a single scrap of food. And Chen Xiangdong was nothing but a deadbeat, useless street thug, whose front door was violently kicked in by loan sharks every single day. Now, he had transformed into a legendary, highly respected restaurant mogul renowned across the entire province, single-handedly providing absolute security for his household, while orchestrating a complete god-tier destiny reversal for all his loyal Day One brothers. She gently caressed the ultra-luxurious mink coat wrapping her body, and looking down at her peacefully sleeping infant son, tears of pure happiness silently rolled down her cheeks, prompting her to quickly turn her head away and discreetly wipe them clean with the back of her hand. The legendary drinking session raged on into the dead of the night, until the midnight countdown for New Year's Eve finally echoed across the city. A deafening explosion of festive firecrackers completely shattered the night sky, illuminating the entire horizon in a brilliant fiery crimson glow. The completely wasted brothers were now stumbling and swaying heavily on their feet, clinging to each other for absolute survival as they staggered toward the exit. Juzi, his tongue completely heavy and slurring from the alcohol, gave a dramatic deep bow at the entrance, bellowing Brother Dong, sister-in-law, Happy New Year, before finally being aggressively hauled downstairs by Dakyang. A profound, serene silence instantly blanketed the imperial suite, leaving behind a chaotic battlefield of leftover gourmet delicacies and emptied liquor bottles. Chen Xiangdong calmly walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window, wiping away the thick layer of fogged-up condensation with his palm. Song Shuyun gently wheeled the stroller over to his side, softly resting her head against his broad shoulder. Chen Xiangdong tightly wrapped a powerful arm around her shoulder, lowering his head to light up one final cigarette. As he gazed out at the thousands of shimmering, illuminated homes sprawling across the city,